There are three kinds of silence on the mountain. The silence of falling snow, soft as a whispered prayer. The silence of wind before a storm, taut as a bowstring pulled to breaking. And the silence of men preparing to kill each other. Jacob Morrow knew all three, and on this October morning in 1884, high in the Colorado Rockies where the air cut like a blade and the peaks scraped the belly of heaven, he heard the third kind. He stood on the granite outcrop behind his cabin, a brass spyglass pressed to his eye, counting the riders below. 12 men. No, 13. They moved in single file up the narrow trail, horses picking their way through scree that could slide and take a man tumbling 1,000 feet into the dark pine valleys. The lead rider wore a coat too fine for hunting, rode a thoroughbred too expensive for honest work. This was not a man who tracked game. This was a man who owned things, or thought he did. Jacob lowered the glass. His hands were steady. They had been steady for 20 years, through battles and ambushes, through the sighting of rifles and the pulling of triggers that ended lives from distances so great the targets never heard the shot that killed them. But his heart, that traitorous muscle, hammered against his ribs like a fist against a door that would not open. 8 years. 8 years since he had last seen riders coming up this trail with purpose. 8 years since he had returned from a hunting trip to find his cabin burning, his Lakota wife and 6-year-old son dead inside, their bodies twisted together where she had tried to shield him from the flames. 8 years since he had tracked the men responsible and learned they wore badges stamped with the name Blackwood Mining Company. 8 years since he had killed 4 of the 6 and lost the trail of the other 2 when winter came down like the wrath of an indifferent god. This time, he told himself, his lips barely moving in the cold air. This time I am here. He turned from the outcrop and descended through the stunted spruce, moving with the practiced silence of a man who had spent half his life avoiding detection. His boots found purchase on stone without scraping. His coat, made from elk hide and worn to the texture of old paper, did not whisper against branches. At 42 years old, Jacob Morrow was a creature built for these mountains, 6 feet and 3 inches tall, 220 pounds of sinew and scar tissue, with a beard that fell to his chest in a tangle of black, shot through with premature gray. A scar ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, the signature of a grizzly that had objected to sharing a creek. His hands were the size of small shovels, the knuckles enlarged from breaks that had healed crooked because there had been no doctor within 100 miles. When he reached the cabin, he paused at the door. Inside, he could hear voices, a woman's voice, low and urgent, a boy's voice, tight with pain. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself with the breathing technique he had learned in the army. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. The heart rate slowed. The world came back into focus. He pushed open the door. The cabin was a single room, 20 feet by 20, built from lodgepole pine he had cut and hauled himself. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, the chimney rising straight and true through a roof shingled with split cedar. The floor was packed earth covered with furs. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs another. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with the scent of sage and yarrow and something darker, something medicinal and bitter. On the table, a boy lay on his back, his face the color of ash. He could not have been more than 16, thin as a sapling, with hair the color of old straw. His right leg was exposed from the knee down, and even from the doorway Jacob could see the infection. The flesh around the ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, mottled purple and yellow, with red streaks climbing toward the knee like the roots of some poisonous plant. The smell was unmistakable, gangrene in its early stages. Another day, maybe 2, and the leg would have to come off. Another week, and the boy would be dead. Beside him stood a woman in a nun's habit. The black wool was torn in places, stained with mud, and what looked like blood. Her veil had come loose on one side, revealing dark hair plastered to her skull with sweat. She was young, perhaps 24 or 25, with a face that mixed sharp intelligence with bone-deep exhaustion. Her hands, which held a damp cloth, were trembling. When Jacob entered, she spun toward him. Her hand dropped to something at her waist. A pistol. Small caliber, probably a .32, but a gun nonetheless. For a moment, they stared at each other across the small room. Then she seemed to take in his size, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he filled the door frame, and her hand moved away from the weapon. Not out of trust, out of calculation. She had recognized that if he meant harm, the pistol would not save her. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "The man who owns this cabin." Jacob moved into the room, letting the door close behind him. His eyes went to the boy. "Who is he?" "Thomas." He stepped in a trap. An old one, rusted. It had been hidden under leaves. The wound became infected 2 days ago. "I have been trying to clean it, but I do not have the right medicines. I do not have the tools." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Jacob approached the table. The boy's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. Jacob touched his forehead. "Burning up." He lifted the leg gently, examining the wound. The trap had been a small one, meant for beaver or fox. The teeth had gone through the boot leather and into the meat of the ankle, crushing bone. When the boy had pulled free, he had left pieces of himself behind. Now those pieces were rotting inside him, poisoning his blood. "He will die," Jacob said, "unless we cut it out. Tonight." The woman made a sound, half gasp, half sob. "You can do that. I have done it before." He looked at her. "You have medical training. I worked in a hospital. At the convent in Boston, I assisted in surgeries. I changed dressings. I gave medications. But I never performed an amputation. We are not amputating. Not yet. We drain the infection. We remove the dead tissue. We pack it with medicine. If that does not work, then we cut." He paused. "What is your name?" "Sister Grace. Sister Grace Devereaux." "Why is a nun in my cabin?" She hesitated. The look that crossed her face was complex, layered with fear and shame and defiance all at once. "I was traveling to Silverton, to an orphanage there. We became lost in a storm. Thomas and I. We wandered for 2 days. When we found your cabin, I thought it was abandoned." "Silverton is south," Jacob said. "You were traveling north." Another pause. "I must have misread the compass." A nun with a pistol and a compass, traveling alone with a boy young enough to be her son, in October when the snow comes any day, heading in the wrong direction. Jacob studied her face. "You are running." She met his eyes. "Yes." "From who?" She looked away. "People who believe I am their property." Jacob felt something cold settle in his chest. He knew that tone. He had heard it in the voices of escaped slaves, of women fleeing violent husbands, of children running from workhouses where they had been treated as less than animals. It was the voice of someone who had chosen death over capture. He nodded once. "You can stay, until the boy is well enough to travel. But there are riders coming. They will be here in 2 hours, maybe less. If they are who I think they are not looking for you, they are looking for me. But they will take you anyway, if they find you." Grace's face went white. "How many?" 13. "We cannot fight 13 men." "No, but we can hide. There is a root cellar under the floorboards behind the stove. It is large enough for you and the boy. You go there. You do not come out until I come for you. Oh, no matter what you hear. And you, I stay. This is my land. I will not be driven from it again." The word again hung in the air between them. Grace opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. She looked at the boy on the table, then back at Jacob. "If they kill you, we die too. Trapped in a cellar. If I die, you wait until dark. There is a tunnel. It leads 200 yards north, comes out in the rocks above the tree line. You take the boy and you go. Do not stop. Do not look back. Follow the stars north until you reach the mining camp at Copper Creek. Tell them Jacob Morrow sent you. They will help. Why would you do this for us?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind had picked up. It moaned through the gaps in the logs, a sound like distant voices. "Because I was not here last time," he said finally, "when they came before, and I have spent 8 years wishing I had been." Before Grace could respond, the bush on the table stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Oh, Pa," he whispered. "Pa, do not leave me." Grace bent over him, her hand on his forehead. "Hush now. You are safe. Rest." But the boy's eyes had found Jacob. He stared up at this huge, bearded stranger with something like hope, something like terror. "Do not let them take me back," he said. "Please, I will work. I will do anything. Just do not let them take me back." Jacob felt his throat tighten. The boy thought he was being sold again, or returned to wherever he had run from. "No one is taking you anywhere," he said. His voice was rough as gravel. "You are under my protection now." The boy's eyes closed. His breathing eased slightly, as if those words had been a medicine of their own. Grace looked up at Jacob. There were tears on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Jacob said. "We all have to survive the night first." He moved to the door, opened it, looked out at the valley below. The riders were closer now. He could see them clearly without the spyglass. At the front, a man in a black coat, his horse a beautiful blood bay. Behind him, men in working clothes, rifles across their saddles. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they owned the world and everything in it. Jacob recognized that confidence. He had seen it in the faces of officers who ordered men to their deaths over patches of ground that would be forgotten within a year. He had seen it in the faces of men who believed that might made right, that possession was 9/10 of the law, that the weak existed to serve the strong. He closed the door. "We have an hour," he said. "Let us use it well." The surgery was conducted by lamplight as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. Jacob had done this work before, in field hospitals where the wounded came in waves and there was never enough morphine, never enough chloroform, never enough time. He worked quickly and without hesitation. Grace assisted. She held the lamp steady when his hands needed light. She passed him instruments before he asked for them. She did not flinch when he made the first incision, and blood, dark and thick with infection, poured out onto the table. She only made a sound once, when he used a small pair of pliers to extract a piece of trap metal that had broken off inside the wound. A sound like a swallowed scream. The boy, Thomas, was conscious for the first part. There was no anesthetic. Jacob had given him a strip of leather to bite on and a cup of whiskey to dull the edge. But pain like this could not be dulled. It could only be endured. The boy bit through the leather. His back arched off the table. Sweat poured from him, soaking his shirt, dripping onto the floorboards. But he did not scream. He whimpered. He gasped. He made animal sounds in his throat, but he did not scream. Grace held his hand. She leaned close to his ear and spoke in a low, steady voice. "You are strong. You are so strong. God is with you. I am with you. Breathe with me, in and out, in and out." After 30 minutes, Thomas passed out. His body went limp, his head lolling to the side. Jacob felt for a pulse. Still there, still strong. The boy had simply reached the limit of what consciousness could tolerate. It was a mercy. Jacob worked for another 15 minutes, removing dead tissue, packing the wound with a poultice made from crushed yarrow and willow bark, and a powder he had traded from the Ute people, something they made from a fungus that grew on dead trees. The Ute said it fought the bad spirits that lived in wounds. Jacob did not know about spirits, but he knew the powder worked better than anything army doctors had used. When he was done, he wrapped the leg in clean cloth, tied it off, and stepped back. His hands were covered in blood to the wrists. He went to the basin and washed them, scrubbing under the nails, watching the water turn red. Grace stood on the other side of the table, staring down at the boy. She was shaking now, the adrenaline leaving her system, leaving her hollow. "Will he live?" she asked. "I do not know." The infection was deep. "We will know in 2 days. If the fever breaks, he lives. If it does not, he dies, or we take the leg. There is no third option." She nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing blood across her cheek without realizing it. "I have never seen anything like that," she said. "The way you worked, like you had done it 1,000 times. Closer to 100, Jacob said. He dried his hands on a towel. "During the war, after the war. Men get hurt out here. If you are the only one who can help, you help." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. "Who are you, Jacob Morrow?" He did not answer. Instead, he moved to the window, peered out through a gap in the shutters. The riders had stopped at the edge of the meadow, just beyond rifle range. They were dismounting, making camp, building a fire. They would wait until morning to approach. That was good. It gave Jacob time. "They are here," he said. Grace came to stand beside him. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5'6", and she moved with a kind of contained grace that suggested she had not always worn the habit of a nun. When she stood close, Jacob could smell her. Sweat and fear and something underneath. Something like lavender, a scent from a different world, a world of cities and churches and lives lived indoors. "What will you do?" she asked. "Talk to them. Find out what they want. Try to send them away without bloodshed. And if they will not go," Jacob was quiet, "then there will be blood." She turned to face him. The lamplight caught her eyes. They were blue, he realized. A startling, clear blue, like the sky at altitude where the air is thin and every color is sharper than it should be. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. Why do you live here, alone, in a place where winter can kill you if you make one mistake? Why not live in a town where there are people, where there is help if you need it?" Jacob looked out at the darkening mountains. "Because people killed my family," he said, "and I did not want to be near people anymore." The night passed slowly. Grace and Thomas were hidden in the root cellar, the trap door concealed beneath a rug and a strategically placed chair. Jacob sat in the darkness, his rifle across his knees, listening to the sounds of the men camped below. Their voices carried in the thin mountain air. Laughter, the clink of bottles, songs sung off-key. They were not worried. They did not believe there was any danger. That would be their first mistake. At dawn, Jacob stepped out onto the porch. The sky was the color of old iron, heavy with the promise of snow. The meadow before his cabin was perhaps 200 yards wide, ringed by aspens that had turned gold with the season. Beyond the aspens, the camp. 13 men, now awake and moving, tending their fire, saddling horses. One man separated from the group and began walking toward the cabin. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, wearing that fine black coat Jacob had noticed yesterday. As he drew closer, Jacob could see his face, handsome in a cold way, with sharp cheekbones and a mouth that looked like it had been carved from something harder than flesh. His hair was silver at the temples, and he walked with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. The man stopped 30 yards from the porch. He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "Jacob Morrow," the man said. His voice was cultured, Eastern, with just a hint of something else underneath. Southern, maybe, or European. "I am Nathaniel Blackwood. I believe we have business to discuss." Jacob said nothing. He stood with his rifle held loose in one hand, the butt resting on the porch boards. He had learned long ago that silence was a weapon. It made people uncomfortable. It made them talk to fill the void. And when people talked, they revealed things they had not meant to reveal. Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. He gestured to the land around them. "This valley, this meadow, the creek that runs through it. You believe you own it. I do own it," Jacob said. "I have the deed. Filed in Denver in 1887. Paid for it with money I earned." "Money you earned killing people," Blackwood said. "Is that not correct? You were an Army scout during the Indian Wars. You tracked natives so soldiers could slaughter them." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I tracked people. What the Army did after was not my choice. But you took the money." Blackwood took a step closer. "Blood money, some would call it. The point, Mr. Morrow, is that your deed is based on a survey that was later found to be an error. A new survey shows that this land falls within the boundaries of the Blackwood Mining Company claim. This valley, it turns out, sits atop one of the richest copper deposits in Colorado, worth perhaps $2 million. And you are what we call in the business a squatter." Jacob felt something cold move through him. Not fear, not exactly. More like recognition. The shape of the thing he had been dreading for 8 years was finally revealing itself. He let the silence stretch again, watching Blackwood's face. "I have mineral rights," he said finally. "They are part of my deed. A deed based on a faulty survey is not legally binding." Blackwood spread his hands. "I am not an unreasonable man, Mr. Morrow. I am prepared to offer you compensation for your trouble. $500, enough to buy land elsewhere, to start over. All you must do is sign this paper and leave within 48 hours. From inside his coat, Blackwood produced a folded document. He held it up so Jacob could see the official-looking seals. the dense paragraphs of legal text. And if I refuse, Jacob said, then I will be forced to take legal action. I will file a claim in territorial court. Judge Pemberton, who oversees this district, will rule in my favor. You will be evicted by the sheriff. If you resist, you will be arrested. If you resist arrest, well, Blackwood's smile returned. Accidents happen, especially to men who live alone in dangerous places. Jacob stepped down from the porch. He moved slowly, deliberately, covering the 10 yards that separated them. When he stopped, he was close enough that Blackwood had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. Close enough that the smaller man could smell him, could sense the weight and mass of him, could feel the very real threat of what this mountain man could do if he chose to do it. Mr. Blackwood, Jacob said. His voice was very quiet, very calm. I know who you are. I know your father was Colonel Arthur Blackwood. I know he ran the Colorado division of your company during the war and after. I know he gave orders to clear native settlements by any means necessary. And I know that 8 years ago, men wearing Blackwood Mining Company badges burned my cabin while my wife and son were inside. I was away hunting. When I came back, I found their bodies. My wife had been shot twice. My son was 6 years old. Blackwood's face did not change, but something happened to his eyes. They became flatter, less human. I tracked your father's men, Jacob continued. I found 4 of them. They are no longer a problem. I wanted to find the other 2. I wanted to find your father. But he died before I could reach him. Heart failure, they said. So I came here. I bought this land. I built this cabin. I tried to find peace, and now you come to my door with papers and threats, and you think I will leave because you tell me to. He leaned closer. Blackwood did not retreat, but Jacob saw the muscles in his jaw clench. I am not leaving, Jacob said. You are going to take your men and ride back down this mountain. You are going to file whatever legal papers you want to file. And when the sheriff comes with an eviction notice, I will deal with it then. But you personally are not welcome on my land. If you come here again, I will consider it an act of war. Do we understand each other? Blackwood stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was a cold sound, empty of humor. You think you can threaten me, he said. You think because you are big and you have a rifle that I will simply walk away. Mr. Morrow, I own half of Colorado. I have judges in my pocket, sheriffs on my payroll, politicians who owe me favors. You are one man on one mountain. You are nothing. I am the man who killed 4 of your father's best, Jacob said. Remember that when you leave. He turned and walked back to the cabin. He did not hurry. He did not look back. He climbed the steps, crossed the porch, and went inside. Only when the door was closed and barred did he allow himself to breathe. Through the window, he watched Blackwood stand there for another minute, staring at the cabin with an expression that mixed rage and something else. Calculation, perhaps, or recognition. Then he turned and walked back to his men. Within an hour, they were gone. Jacob waited another hour after they left before opening the trapdoor to the cellar. Grace climbed out first, blinking in the daylight. She looked exhausted, her face gray with strain. Behind her came Thomas, who had regained consciousness but was still weak, his injured leg dragging. Are they gone? Grace asked. For now. What did they want? My land. He helped Thomas to the bed, eased him down. The boy groaned but did not cry out. The fever is lower, Jacob noted. That is good. Keep him warm. Keep the wound clean. Change the dressing every 4 hours. Grace nodded. Then she looked at Jacob. I heard what you said to that man about your wife and son. I am sorry. Sorrow does not bring them back, Jacob said. No, but it matters that someone knows, that someone cares. He did not know how to respond to that. So he simply nodded and went to the stove to make coffee. His hands, he noticed, were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from rage. The old rage, the rage he had spent 8 years trying to bury, was rising up again like floodwater, seeping through a levee. Grace came to stand beside him. Mr. Morrow, she said, the man who was here, Nathaniel Blackwood. I know him. Jacob looked at her sharply. 6 years ago, Grace continued, my father tried to arrange a marriage between us. I was 18. Nathaniel was 42. I refused. I refused. My father was angry. He said I was throwing away a great opportunity. that a man like Blackwood could give me everything. I told him I would rather have nothing than be owned. So I ran. I joined the convent. I thought I would be safe there, and you were. Until recently, until 3 months ago. Nathaniel found me. He came to the convent with a proposal. He would donate $15,000 for a new chapel. In exchange, the Mother Superior would convince me to leave my vows and marry him. When I refused again, he became angry. He said I had embarrassed him twice, that he would not be embarrassed a third time. He said if I would not come willingly, he would find another way. A week later, I was accused of stealing money from the convent donation box. There was a warrant issued for my arrest. I knew it was him. I knew if they took me, I would disappear. So I ran again. Jacob poured 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Grace. And Thomas, I found him in Leadville, living on the street. His parents died of cholera. He had nowhere to go. I thought if I could get him to the orphanage in Silverton, he would have a chance, but we got lost. And then he stepped in the trap, and now we are here. She sipped her coffee. Her hands were steady now, but her eyes were far away. Do you believe in God, Mr. Morrow? I do not know, Jacob said. I used to, but God was in my cabin the night it burned, and he did nothing. So either he is not there, or he is there, and he does not care. Either way, I stopped praying. I still pray, Grace said, but I am not sure anyone is listening. They stood in silence for a while, drinking coffee, watching the morning light spread across the meadow. Outside, a raven called. The wind moved through the aspens with a sound like rushing water. What will you do now? Grace asked. I will repair the fence line, check the traps, gather firewood for winter. The same things I always do, and when they come back, because they will come back. I know. Jacob looked at his hands, scarred and calloused and larger than they needed to be. When they come back, I will be here, and we will see who is stronger, a man who owns half of Colorado or a man who owns nothing but refuses to leave. 5 days later, Thomas's fever broke. He woke clear-eyed and hungry, asking for food in a voice that was weak but steady. He woke clear-eyed and hungry, asking for food in a voice that was weak but steady. Grace cried. She tried to hide it, turning away to busy herself with the bandages, but Jacob saw her shoulders shake. Over the following week, the boy healed with the resilience of youth. Within 2 weeks, he could sit up. Within 3 weeks, he could stand, leaning on a crutch Jacob fashioned from a length of pine. He was thin as a rail, all angles and awkward limbs, with a face that would have been handsome if it had carried more meat on the bones. His eyes were old, though, eyes that had seen too much too young. Jacob taught him things, how to split kindling without wasting motion, how to tell if meat had gone bad by the smell, how to read the weather in the behavior of animals. Thomas absorbed it all with the desperate intensity of someone who understands that knowledge is the difference between living and dying. Grace watched them work together. Sometimes Jacob would catch her looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Gratitude, certainly, but something else underneath. Curiosity, perhaps, or wariness. She had not yet decided what kind of man he was. One evening, as Jacob came in from chopping wood, he found Grace and Thomas at the table. Grace was teaching the boy to read, using a worn Bible as a textbook. Her finger traced the words while Thomas sounded them out, halting and uncertain. In the beginning, Thomas read, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. Grace looked up as Jacob entered. She smiled. It transformed her face, made her look younger. He is learning quickly, she said. I never had much schooling, Thomas said. He looked embarrassed. My pa did not think it was important. It is important, Jacob said. He set down the armload of wood beside the stove. A man who can read can learn anything. A man who cannot is at the mercy of those who can. Did you have schooling? Thomas asked. Some. My mother taught me before she died. After that, I taught myself. The army had books. I read them when I could. What did you read? Grace asked. Poetry, mostly. Shakespeare. Whitman. It seemed strange to read about beauty while surrounded by death. But perhaps that was why I read it. To remember that beauty existed. Grace studied him. Would you read to us sometime? Jacob shrugged. If you like. So that night after dinner, he pulled down a slim volume from the shelf above his bed. It was Leaves of Grass, the pages yellowed and soft from handling. He read to them by firelight while the wind howled outside and the first snow of winter began to fall. His voice was rough and unused to this kind of work, but he read well with a sense of the rhythm, an understanding of when to pause and when to press forward. When he finished, Thomas was asleep in the chair, his head tilted back, mouth open. Grace sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. "That was beautiful," she said quietly. "It is just words. Words matter. They can wound or they can heal. They can imprison or they can free." She looked at him. "You are not what I expected, Jacob Morrow. What did you expect? A brute? A hermit driven mad by solitude? Instead, I find a man who performs surgery, who reads poetry, who teaches an orphan boy with patience and kindness." She paused. "Who are you really?" "Just a man," Jacob said. "A man who has done things he regrets, who is trying to do better. That is all. That is enough," Grace said. 3 weeks after Thomas stepped in the trap, the first real snow came. It fell for 2 days without pause, laying down 3 feet of new powder, erasing the world, making it clean again. When it stopped, the sun came out fierce and cold, turning everything to crystal. The air was so clear it hurt to look at. Every branch, every rock, every blade of frozen grass stood out in painful detail. Jacob went outside to check the game traps. He moved on snowshoes, the long stride eating distance, his breath pluming before him. The world was utterly silent. Even the wind had stilled. It was the silence of winter, the silence of waiting. He was returning to the cabin, a pair of snowshoe hairs slung over his shoulder, when he saw it. Footprints, boot prints to be precise, leading up from the valley, circling the cabin, then heading back down. Someone had come while he was gone. Someone had scouted his home. Jacob followed the tracks to the southern corner of his property, where he had strung a fence line to keep his 2 mules from wandering off cliffs in the fog. The fence had been cut, not broken by an animal, cut cleanly with wire cutters. 30 yards inside his property line, he found the second message. A doe lay in the snow. She had been shot through the gut, a cruel wound that would have taken hours to kill her. But the hunters had not waited. They had butchered her badly, hacking the meat into strips too small to be useful, then left the carcass to rot. They had taken nothing. This was not about food. This was about sending a message. We can come here, we can take what is yours. We can waste what we want. What will you do about it? Jacob knelt beside the doe. Her eyes were still open, glazed with death. He reached out and closed them with one hand. "Forgive me," he said. "This was not about you." He dragged the carcass deep into the timber for the scavengers, then returned to repair the fence. He worked in the cold until his hands ached, twisting the wire tight, splicing in new lengths where it had been cut. When he was finished, he stood looking down at the valley. Somewhere below, Blackwood was waiting, planning, preparing for the next move. Let him come, Jacob thought. Let him send his men. This mountain has rules, and the first rule is that the mountain decides who lives and who dies, not men in expensive coats, not companies with lawyers. The mountain. He shouldered his rifle and walked home through snow that squeaked under his boots like styrofoam. The sun was setting, turning the peaks pink and gold. By the time he reached the cabin, the color had bled away, leaving only gray and darkness. Inside, Grace was cooking. The smell of frying rabbit filled the small space. Thomas sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with a knife Jacob had given him. They looked up when he entered. "You were gone a long time," Grace said. "We were worried." "Someone cut my fence," Jacob said. "Killed a deer and left it to waste." Grace's face went pale. "Blackwood. Probably. What does it mean?" "It means he is testing me, seeing if I will react, seeing if I am the kind of man who can be provoked into making a mistake." He set down his rifle, began removing his coat. "It also means he is not done." Thomas stood. His leg had healed enough that he barely limped now. "Sir," he said, "if they come, if there is fighting, I want to help." Jacob looked at him. The boy was earnest, desperate to prove his worth. But he was also 16 years old and had probably never fired a gun in anger. "You will help," Jacob said, "but not by fighting. You will help by surviving. If things go badly, you take Grace and you run. You use the tunnel, you do not look back. That is your job. Can you do it?" Thomas looked disappointed but nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good. Now let us eat." They ate in silence, the weight of what was coming, pressing down on all of them. After dinner, Grace read from the Bible while Thomas cleaned the dishes. Jacob sat by the fire, running an oiled cloth over his rifle, checking the action, counting his ammunition. 47 rounds. Not enough for a siege, but enough to make attackers think twice. When Grace finished reading, she closed the Bible and looked at Jacob. "Tell me about your wife," she said. Jacob's hands stilled on the rifle. "Why? Because I want to know who she was. Because she was important to you. Because I think talking about her might help." He was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he began to speak. "Her name was Red Willow. She was Lakota Sioux, from the band that lived near Fort Laramie. I met her when I was 24, fresh off a campaign, lost in a blizzard. I would have frozen to death if she had not found me. She brought me to her family's lodge. They gave me food, shelter, warmth. When the storm passed, I left. But I came back. I kept coming back. Eventually, I realized I was not coming back for the warmth or the food. I was coming back for her." He paused. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up again, testing the corners of the cabin, looking for weaknesses. "We married in the traditional way. Her people did not like it. A white man and a Lakota woman. It was the wrong time for that kind of love. But Red Willow did not care. She said love was not about timing. It was about choice. And she chose me." "What was she like?" Grace asked softly. "Strong. What? She knew things about the land that I am still learning. She could read the weather better than any scout I ever met. She could track a deer through rock. She had a laugh that sounded like water." Jacob stopped. His throat had tightened. "And she loved our son more than life. When the fire came, she could have run. The door was not blocked. But she stayed with Samuel. She died holding him. That was the kind of woman she was." Tears were running down Grace's face now. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry. Do not be sorry for asking." He looked at her. "Talking about her makes her real again. I have not spoken her name in 8 years. I thought if I did not say it, it would hurt less. But silence does not heal. It just makes the wound go deeper." Thomas had stopped washing dishes. He stood at the basin, his back to them, his shoulders shaking. Jacob understood. The boy was thinking of his own parents, his own losses. "Thomas," Jacob said gently, "come sit." The boy came. He sat on the floor by the fire, and Grace reached down and put her hand on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time. 3 people who had all lost everything, who had all ended up in this cabin in the middle of winter, who were all trying to figure out how to survive what was coming. Finally, Grace spoke. "Mr. Morrow, Jacob, I need to tell you something." Jacob waited. She took a breath. "When Nathaniel Blackwood came here, when you told him about your wife and son, you said his father's men killed them, that they wore Blackwood Mining Company badges. I do not think that was random. I think Colonel Arthur Blackwood gave the order personally, and I think the reason he gave it was because you refused to help him clear the Lakota settlements. You were supposed to guide the soldiers, but you would not. So he punished you." "How do you know this?" Jacob said. His voice was very calm, very quiet. "Because 6 years ago, when my father was trying to arrange my marriage to Nathaniel, I heard him talking to his associates. They were discussing business. Nathaniel was bragging about how his father had never let personal feelings interfere with profit. He told a story. He said once, a scout refused an order and embarrassed his father in front of other officers. So his father had the scout's cabin burned with his family inside. He laughed when he told it. He said it proved that loyalty mattered more than mercy." Jacob stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkness. He did not trust himself to speak. Grace continued. "I did not know the scout's name. I did not know where it happened. But when you told Blackwood what happened to your family, I remembered. And I understood. Nathaniel is not just here for the copper. He is here because he knows who you are. He knows you are the man who killed 4 of his father's men. This is personal revenge disguised as business." Jacob's hands were fists. The rage was there again, hot and red and demanding release. He could feel it pushing at the inside of his skull, demanding that he go down that mountain right now, find Blackwood, and end this. But then he felt a hand on his arm. Grace had come to stand beside him. She was not afraid of him, even now, even with violence radiating from him like heat. "Do not," she said, "do not go to him. That is what he wants. He wants you to attack so he can kill you and claim self-defense. Do not give him that. Then what do I do? Jacob said. Let him take everything again. You fight, but smart. You use the law. You get help. You do not fight alone. I have always fought alone. Not anymore, she squeezed his arm. You have us now, Thomas and me, and perhaps others. There are people in the valley who do not love Blackwood, who might help if asked. Jacob looked at her in the lamplight. Her face was both soft and determined. She was not the frightened nun he had found on his doorstep 3 weeks ago. She was becoming something else, something stronger. All right, he said, we will try it your way. But if your way fails, we go to war. Understood. Understood. That night, Jacob dreamed of fire. He dreamed of his cabin burning, of Red Willow screaming his name, of Samuel calling for his father through smoke and flames. He dreamed of riding home too late, of finding only ashes, of digging through the rubble with his bare hands until they bled. He woke before dawn, gasping, his shirt soaked with sweat. The cabin was cold, the fire burned down to embers. Across the room, Grace and Thomas slept, Grace in his bed and Thomas on a pallet by the stove. They looked peaceful, young, vulnerable. He rose quietly and went outside. The stars were still visible, countless and cold, like the eyes of indifferent gods. He stood on the porch and breathed the thin air and made himself a promise. This time, he would not be too late. This time, he would be here when the fire came. And this time, the people he protected would live. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Grace stepped out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She came to stand beside him without speaking. They watched the eastern horizon slowly brighten, watched the stars fade one by one, watched the new day arrive with all its dangers and possibilities. We will survive this, Grace said. It was not a question. Yes, Jacob said, we will. And in that moment, standing on a mountain as winter tightened its grip and enemies gathered below, they believed it. The decision to go down to Ironwood Station was not made lightly. For 3 days after finding the butchered doe, Jacob watched the valley through his spyglass, counting riders, noting patterns. Blackwood's men came and went like wolves testing a perimeter, never quite attacking, never quite leaving. They were waiting for something. Orders, perhaps, or winter. Winter would make the cabin unreachable for months, would trap Jacob and his guests in isolation where they could be forgotten, where their disappearance in spring would raise no questions. Grace understood this without being told. She had spent 6 years in a convent, learning to read the silences between words, the meanings hidden in gestures. She knew they were running out of time. We need allies, she said on the 3rd evening. Her voice was calm, but her hands, folding bandages by the lamplight, moved with nervous energy. We cannot fight this alone. There are no allies, Jacob said. He was at the table cleaning his rifle for the 2nd time that day. The repetitive motion soothed him. Ironwood belongs to Blackwood. The mine employs half the town. The other half survives on money that flows from the mine. No one will stand against him. Grace set down the bandages. Her blue eyes caught the lamplight. Someone will. There must be someone. A priest, perhaps. A doctor. Someone with a conscience. Jacob looked at her. Conscience is expensive when you have mouths to feed. But he paused, considering. There is Doc Rivers. We served together during the campaigns. He owes me nothing, but he is an honest man. And Father Malone, he drinks too much and talks too little, but he hates injustice. He might listen. Then we go to them. Tomorrow, it is dangerous. If Blackwood has men watching the trails, they will see us. Then we do not take the trails. You know another way. Jacob studied her face. She had changed in the weeks since her arrival. The hollowness had left her cheeks. The fear had receded from her eyes, replaced by something harder. Determination, or perhaps desperation. They were often twins. There is a ridge trail, he said finally. It adds 4 hours but avoids the main road. We would need to leave before dawn, be in town by noon, out again before dark. I can do it, Grace said. From his pallet by the stove, Thomas spoke without opening his eyes. I am coming too. No, Jacob said. You stay. Guard the cabin. The boy opened his eyes then. They were older than they should be. Sir, with respect, I am not staying behind like a child. You said we are family. Family does not leave each other. Grace looked at Jacob. Out of the mouths of babes, she said softly. Jacob felt something tighten in his chest. The boy was right. He had said they were family. And family meant showing up. It meant being present. It meant not leaving people behind because you thought you were protecting them. All right, he said, but you follow my orders. No arguments, no heroics. We go in quiet, we do our business, we leave quiet. Understood. Yes, sir, Thomas said. A smile flickered across his face. There and gone. They left 2 hours before dawn when the stars were still sharp overhead and the cold was deep enough to make the horses snort frost. Jacob led them on the gray mule he called Judah, steady and sure-footed in the darkness. Grace rode the smaller brown mule, her habit exchanged for a plain woolen dress and a coat that had belonged to Red Willow. Thomas walked beside them, his limp barely noticeable now, his hand resting on the knife Jacob had given him. The ridge trail was treacherous even in daylight. In darkness, it required absolute trust in the animals and in Jacob's knowledge of the terrain. They moved single file along a path barely wider than a man's shoulders, with a drop of 300 feet on one side and a wall of vertical rock on the other. The wind at this altitude was constant and cruel, searching for exposed skin, finding it, punishing it. No one spoke. Speech required breath, and breath was precious. They climbed for 2 hours, the trail switchbacking up the mountain's face, each step taking them higher into the thin air where the lungs labored and the heart hammered. By the time they reached the ridge crest, the eastern sky had begun to pale. Jacob called a halt. They stood on a knife edge of granite, the world dropping away on both sides, the peaks around them catching the first light. Below, perhaps 5 miles distant, the scattered lights of Ironwood Station glowed against the darkness of the valley floor. Grace dismounted. She stood at the edge, looking down, her breath coming in visible gasps. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is indifferent," Jacob replied. "Beauty and cruelty are not opposites here. They are the same thing." They descended the far side as the sun rose, trading the wind for the relative shelter of the pine forest. The temperature rose 10 degrees in as many minutes. They could breathe again without pain. By the time they reached the valley floor, the sun was high and warm, the day unseasonably pleasant. It felt like a gift, or a trap. Ironwood Station had grown since Jacob's last visit 6 months ago. New buildings crowded the main street, raw lumber still bleeding sap. A stamp mill hammered somewhere to the north, the sound carrying for miles. The smell of coal smoke and horse manure and unwashed humanity was overwhelming after weeks in the clean air of the high country. They tied the mules behind Sarah Bennett's trading post, the only establishment Jacob trusted. Sarah was a widow, her husband killed 3 years ago in what Blackwood called a mining accident and what everyone else called murder for asking too many questions about safety conditions. She had stayed in Ironwood out of stubbornness, running her small store, surviving on the edges of Blackwood's empire. When Jacob entered through the back door, Sarah dropped the bolt of cloth she was holding. Her hand went to her mouth. "Jacob," she breathed, "you should not be here. They are looking for you. I know. Where is Doc Rivers?" "At his clinic." "But Jacob, there are warrants. Sheriff Cutler has papers. Trespassing, destruction of property, harboring a fugitive." Her eyes went to Grace, who had followed Jacob inside. "You are the nun, the one Blackwood wants." "I am Grace Devereaux," Grace said. Her voice was steady, "and I am not his property." Sarah's face softened. "I know, honey, but knowing does not matter in this town. Blackwood owns the judge, the sheriff, half the businesses. You need to run, both of you." "We need to fight," Jacob said. "And to fight, we need witnesses, people who will testify to the truth." Sarah laughed. It was not a happy sound. The truth is whatever Blackwood says it is." She looked at Thomas, who had been standing silent by the door. "And who is this?" "Thomas," Jacob said. "He is with us." "Another runaway," Sarah said. She shook her head. "You are collecting strays, Jacob. That is going to get you killed." "Probably," Jacob agreed, "but it is better than dying alone. Now tell me, is Doc still at his clinic?" "Yes. But be careful. Blackwood has men watching the streets." They left through the back, moving through alleys, staying out of sight. Ironwood was laid out in a grid, the streets running east to west, the alleys north to south. Doc Rivers' clinic was on the far side of town, a small clapboard building with a faded sign that read medical services in peeling paint. Jacob knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. An old signal from this war. A moment later, the door opened a crack. An eye appeared, pale blue and sharp. Then the door swung wide. Jacob Morrow, Doc Rivers said. He was 58 years old, lean as a whip, with a gray beard and hands that trembled slightly from what he claimed was old age and what everyone knew was too much whiskey. I heard you were dead, or wanted for murder, or both. Both sounds right, Jacob said. He stepped inside, motioning for Grace and Thomas to follow. We need help, Doc. The clinic smelled of carbolic acid and old blood. A single room served as examination area, surgery, and living quarters. Medical books lined one wall. Bottles of various tinctures and powders covered another. A narrow cot in the corner suggested Doc did not often leave this place. Doc looked at Grace with the assessing gaze of a physician. You are injured. Grace shook her head. But Thomas was. Jacob saved his leg. Doc turned to Thomas, gestured at a chair. Sit. Let me see. Thomas sat and pulled up his pant leg. The scar tissue was still pink and angry but healing clean. Doc examined it with gentle fingers, probing, testing range of motion. This was a bad infection, he said. Whoever treated it knew what they were doing. Clean drainage, proper debridement. He looked at Jacob. You did this. I had a good teacher, Jacob said. Doc straightened. He moved to a cabinet, poured 3 glasses of whiskey from a bottle. He handed one to Jacob, offered another to Grace, who declined, then drank both himself. Now tell me why you are here and why I should not throw you out before Blackwood's men see you. So Jacob told him. All of it. The survey stakes on his land, the butchered deer, the threats. Blackwood's claim that Jacob's deed was invalid. Grace's story of fleeing an arranged marriage and false accusations of theft. The connection between Nathaniel Blackwood and the death of Red Willow and Samuel 8 years ago. Doc listened without interrupting. When Jacob finished, he poured another whiskey. This is bad, he said. Worse than bad. Blackwood has been consolidating power for months. He got Judge Pemberton appointed by calling in favors in Denver. He put Sheriff Cutler on his payroll with bribes and threats. He has been buying up mining claims all along this range. Your land is the last piece he needs to control the entire copper deposit. So he will not stop, Grace said. He will not stop, Doc confirmed. And you cannot win in a territorial court. Pemberton will rule against you no matter what evidence you present. He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. But there is another option. Federal court. If you can get your case before a federal marshal, someone outside Blackwood's influence, you might have a chance. Jacob leaned forward. Marshal Graves. He still rides this circuit. He does. But he is in Denver right now, overseeing a land dispute. He will not be back until December. Doc looked at Jacob. Can you survive 6 weeks? I do not know. You will need to, Doc said, because that is the only legal path I see. He set down his glass. I will testify for you. I will examine Grace, document that she is of sound mind, provide medical evidence that contradicts any claim of hysteria or insanity. But I cannot do it alone. You need more witnesses. You need someone with moral authority. Father Malone, Grace said. Doc snorted. Malone is a drunk who can barely say mass without forgetting the words. He is also a man who knows right from wrong, Grace said, even if he does not always have the courage to act on it. I think if we ask him, if we appeal to what he was before the bottle took him, he might help. Jacob looked at her. You are optimistic. I am desperate, Grace replied. Desperation and optimism often look the same. They found Father Malone in the church, kneeling before the altar. The church was small, built of rough pine with a simple cross mounted above the door. Inside, it smelled of incense and old wood, and the particular sadness of a holy place that had lost its holiness. Malone was 52 years old but looked older. His face was a map of broken capillaries. His hands shook. His cassock was stained. His face was a map of broken capillaries. His hands shook. His cassock was stained. When he heard them enter, he did not turn. I am praying, he said. Come back later. We need your help, Father, Grace said. Her voice echoed in the empty space. Malone laughed. It was a bitter, empty sound. Everyone needs my help, and I have none to give. Leave me to my prayers. Grace walked down the aisle. She knelt beside him. I know who you are, Father. I know you were a missionary in the territories. I know you built schools for Native children. I know you stood up to the army when they tried to relocate your mission. I know you were brave once. Malone turned to look at her. His eyes were bloodshot, but not unkind. That was a long time ago. Before I learned that bravery gets you nothing but pain, then why are you still here? If you have given up, why not leave? Go somewhere easier, somewhere safer. Malone was quiet for a long moment, because leaving would be the final surrender. Staying is the last act of defiance I have left. Grace took his hand, then defy one more time. Help us. Testify against Blackwood. Tell the truth about what he is doing. He will destroy me. He is already destroying you. One drink at a time. At least this way, your destruction will mean something. Malone looked past her to Jacob, standing in the shadows at the back of the church. You are the mountain man, the one they say killed his family. Jacob stepped into the light. They killed my family, he said. I just survived it. And now you want revenge. No, Jacob said. I want justice. There is a difference, is there? Malone asked. Or is that just what we tell ourselves to make violence feel righteous? Come to the mountain, Jacob said. See what Blackwood has done. See the land he wants to steal. See the people he wants to destroy. Then tell me if justice and revenge are the same thing. Malone stood. He was unsteady on his feet, but determined. All right, he said. I will come, but I want something in return. Name it. I want you to forgive me. Jacob frowned. For what? Malone gestured around the empty church. For this, for failing to be what I should have been, for letting fear and whiskey turn me into a coward. He looked at Jacob with raw honesty. You lost your family and you survived. I lost my faith and I did not. I want your forgiveness so I can begin to forgive myself. Jacob did not know what to say. He was not a man comfortable with this kind of conversation, this kind of emotional nakedness. But he saw the need in Malone's eyes, the desperate hunger for absolution. So he said the only thing he could think to say. There is nothing to forgive, Father. We all do what we can with what we have. You are still here. That is enough. Malone's eyes filled with tears. He nodded once sharply, then turned and walked toward the vestry. Give me a moment to gather my things. They left the church together, 4 people now instead of 3. They were halfway back to Sarah's trading post when the shout came. Morrow, the voice was hard, official. Stop where you are. Jacob turned. Sheriff Wade Cutler stood 30 yards away, flanked by 4 deputies. Cutler was a thick-necked man of 40 with small eyes and a mouth that suggested he had been disappointed by life and had decided to make everyone else pay for it. His hand rested on the pistol at his hip. Jacob Morrow, Cutler said. Grace Devereaux. You are both under arrest. On what charges? Jacob asked. He kept his hands visible, away from his body. Thomas and Grace were behind him. He could feel their fear radiating like heat. Trespassing, destruction of company property, grand larceny. Cutler smiled. It was not a nice smile. And you, Miss Devereaux, are wanted for questioning regarding theft from the Sisters of St. Joseph Convent in Boston. There is a warrant. That warrant is based on false testimony, Grace said. She stepped forward. I stole nothing. That is for a judge to decide. Cutler gestured to his deputies. Take them. The deputies moved forward. Jacob did not resist. He had known this was coming. Resistance now would only give Cutler an excuse to shoot. He let them put the irons on his wrists, feeling the cold metal bite into his skin. Beside him, Grace was also cuffed. Thomas stood frozen, uncertain what to do. Father Malone stepped between the deputies and Thomas. This boy has done nothing, he said. His voice was surprisingly strong. Let him be. Cutler looked at Malone with contempt. Go sleep it off, Father. This is not your concern. Everything in this town is my concern, Malone said. I am still a priest, drunk or sober, and I will not stand by while you arrest innocent people. Then you can join them, Cutler said. He nodded to a deputy. Take the priest too. Public intoxication. I am sober, Malone protested. But they took him anyway, putting irons on his wrists while he quoted scripture, his voice rising. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. They were marched through the streets of Ironwood, a public spectacle. People stopped to stare. Some laughed, some looked away, ashamed. No one intervened. They were taken to the courthouse, a two-story brick building that also served as the jail. In a small anteroom, they waited while Cutler sent word to Judge Pemberton and to Nathaniel Blackwood. Doc Rivers appeared 20 minutes later, breathless. He carried his medical bag. "I am here to examine the prisoners," he told Cutler. "It is my legal right as a licensed physician." Cutler shrugged. "Fine, you have 10 minutes." Doc examined each of them quickly, efficiently. To Grace, he said quietly, "I have documented your condition. You show no signs of mental instability, no evidence of hysteria. I will testify to that." To Jacob, he said, "Stay calm. Do not give them an excuse." To Thomas, wide-eyed and terrified, he said, "Be brave, son." Then the courtroom doors opened, and they were led inside. The courtroom was packed. Miners filled the benches, still dirty from their shift, drawn by the promise of drama. Judge Horace Pemberton sat behind the bench, a fat man in his 60s with jowls that shook when he spoke. He looked bored. The charges were read. Jacob Morrow, trespassing on land owned by Blackwood Mining Corporation. Destruction of survey equipment valued at $200. Grace Devereaux, theft of $800 from a religious institution. Resisting lawful custody. Father Patrick Malone, public intoxication and interference with an officer. "How do you plead?" Pemberton asked. "Not guilty," Jacob said. "To all charges." Pemberton sighed. "Of course you do." He looked at the prosecutor, who was Silas Greer, Blackwood's foreman, a man with no legal training, but plenty of meanness. "Proceed." Greer stood. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been hit repeatedly with something hard. He smiled at Jacob, and it was not friendly. "Your Honor, the facts are simple. Jacob Morrow is a squatter on land that belongs to my employer, Nathaniel Blackwood. When company surveyors attempted to mark the property boundaries, Morrow destroyed their equipment and threatened them with violence. He is a dangerous man with a history of killing. He should be remanded to custody immediately." "I have a deed," Jacob said, "filed in Denver in 1877. This land is mine." "Your deed is based on a faulty survey," Greer said. He produced a document, waved it in the air. "This is the corrected survey, certified by a territorial surveyor. It clearly shows your cabin sits on Blackwood mining land. You are a trespasser." "Let me see that survey," Jacob said. Pemberton waved a hand. "The defendant has no right to examine evidence during proceedings." He looked at Jacob. "Anything else?" "Yes." Jacob's voice was calm but hard. "I want to know why Nathaniel Blackwood's father ordered the murder of my wife and child 8 years ago. I want to know if that is also company policy, destroying families to get land." The courtroom erupted. People shouted. Pemberton banged his gavel. "We will have order," he glared at Jacob. "You will not make wild accusations in this court." "They are not wild," Jacob said. "They are true. Colonel Arthur Blackwood gave the order. His men carried it out. I tracked 4 of them. They confessed before I killed them. The other 2 disappeared, but they all wore Blackwood mining badges." "Lies," Greer said. "Slander." The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Every head turned. Nathaniel Blackwood entered, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than most men in the room earned in a year. He walked down the aisle with complete confidence, his boot heels clicking on the wooden floor. When he reached the front, he turned to address the room. "My father," Blackwood said, his voice smooth and cultured, "was a hard man. He built this company from nothing, carved an empire from rock and sweat and blood." "Did he make enemies?" "Of course. Did some of those enemies die?" "Yes, such is the nature of progress." His eyes found Jacob, but he never ordered the murder of women and children. "That accusation is not only false, it is grotesque." He turned to Pemberton. "Your Honor, I apologize for this disruption. Mr. Morrow is clearly unhinged by grief. I bear him no ill will. In fact, I am prepared to drop all charges against him if he simply leaves my land and accepts fair compensation for his trouble. I am not a cruel man." The room was silent. Everyone waited for Jacob's response. "I do not want your money," Jacob said. "I want my land, and I want justice for my family." "Then you shall have neither," Blackwood said, His voice went cold. You are a squatter and a murderer. You will be evicted. If you resist, you will be jailed. If you resist jail, you will be killed. Those are your choices. Grace stood. She had been silent until now, but something in Blackwood's arrogance broke through her fear. She looked at him across the courtroom, and her voice was clear and strong. You tried to buy me 6 years ago, she said. When I refused, you arranged to have me accused of theft. You wanted to own me like you own this town. But I am not for sale. I will never be for sale. Blackwood's mask slipped for just a moment. His face went hard, his eyes cold. Sit down, he said. You are hysterical. I am honest, Grace said, and that terrifies you. Pemberton banged his gavel. Enough. I have heard all I need to hear. He looked at Jacob. Jacob Morrow, you are guilty of trespassing and destruction of property. You are fined $500 or 30 days in jail. Grace Devereaux, you are remanded to the custody of Nathaniel Blackwood, who will ensure your safe transport to Boston to face charges. No, Grace said. She looked at Jacob, her eyes wide with terror. No. Your Honor, that is irregular. Doc Rivers stood in the gallery. Miss Devereaux should be held in official custody, not given to a private citizen. Mr. Blackwood has offered to cover all transport costs and to ensure Miss Devereaux receives proper care, Pemberton said. I see no reason to refuse his generous offer. Blackwood smiled. He approached Grace. Do not worry, my dear. I will take excellent care of you, just as I always planned. At that moment, the doors burst open again. Father Malone stumbled in, no longer cuffed, holding a ledger. I have evidence, he shouted. Evidence of bribery. Pemberton's face went pale. Sit down, Father. No, Malone's voice was gaining strength, gaining conviction. This is the financial ledger from the convent in Denver. He held it up. It shows that Nathaniel Blackwood paid $15,000, not 10. 10 for the chapel, yes, but 5,000 more. Here, in the notes, 5,000 upon delivery of Grace Devereaux. He looked at the courtroom. He bought her, like livestock. This is human trafficking, Your Honor. A federal crime. The room exploded. People were on their feet, shouting. Pemberton banged his gavel, but no one listened. Blackwood's face went from pale to red. He turned on Malone. Where did you get that? I stole it, Malone said, from Mother Superior's desk when she was not looking. Excommunicate me if you like, but this is the truth. That ledger is inadmissible, Pemberton shouted. Obtained illegally. It is evidence, Doc Rivers said. He pushed through the crowd. And as a federal crime, it requires federal investigation. Your Honor, you must postpone this verdict until Marshal Graves can review. I will do no such thing. Pemberton was sweating now. This court is adjourned. Miss Devereaux will be held pending further. He paused, realizing he had talked himself into a corner. Held in county custody. Blackwood's face was a mask of rage. He looked at Grace. This is not over, he said softly. You will be mine. Over my dead body, Jacob said. That can be arranged, Blackwood replied. The courtroom descended into chaos. Deputies tried to restore order. People were shouting, pushing. In the confusion, Thomas appeared beside Grace. He pressed something into her hand. A key. The key to the handcuffs. He had pickpocketed it from a deputy, quick as a street urchin. Grace's eyes went wide. She looked at Jacob. At the door. Back at Jacob. Run, he mouthed. She ran. Thomas followed. They disappeared into the crowd before anyone noticed. By the time Cutler realized what had happened and gave chase, they were gone. Jacob stood in the courtroom, still cuffed, watching Grace escape. He felt something like satisfaction. She was free. For now. That was enough. Blackwood stood beside Pemberton, speaking in low, urgent tones. Then he turned and left through a side door. Jacob knew where he was going, to gather men, to plan, to prepare for war. Good, Jacob thought. Let it be war. I am ready. They held him overnight in a cell beneath the courthouse. It was cold and dark and smelled of old urine. Jacob did not sleep. He sat on the stone floor, his back against the wall, and thought about Red Willow, about Samuel, about Grace running through the streets of Ironwood with Thomas at her side, about what was coming. At dawn, the cell door opened. Doc Rivers stood there with Sheriff Cutler. Your fine has been paid, Cutler said. His voice was flat. You are free to go. Who paid it? Jacob asked. Friend who wants to remain anonymous, Doc said. He met Jacob's eyes meaningfully. Jacob understood. Doc had paid it, probably with money he could not afford to lose. He stood, felt his joints crack. Where is Father Malone? Released, also paid by anonymous friends. Come on, let us get you out of here before Blackwood changes his mind. They walked out into the morning light. Ironwood was quiet, the streets nearly empty. Jacob breathed the cold air and felt something like freedom. It would not last. But for now, it was enough. Doc led him to the livery where Judah and the other mule waited. Grace and Thomas are at the old mining camp north of here, Doc said quietly. Abandoned line shack. I sent them there with food and blankets. They are waiting for you. Thank you, Jacob said. Do not thank me yet. Doc looked tired, worried. Blackwood is gathering men, mercenaries from Denver, gunfighters. I heard him talking to Greer. He said, and I quote, I want that mountain empty by Christmas. How many men? At least 15, maybe 20. Doc gripped Jacob's arm. You cannot win this fight, Jacob. You need to run. Take Grace and Thomas and go somewhere Blackwood cannot find you. Running is how you die tired, Jacob said. He swung up onto Judah. I am going back to the mountain. I am going to prepare. And when Blackwood comes, I am going to show him what happens when you try to take something from a man who has nothing left to lose. You will die, Doc said. Probably, Jacob agreed, but I will die on my feet, in my home, fighting for something that matters. There are worse deaths. He rode out of Ironwood as the sun climbed higher. He did not look back. Behind him, he knew wheels were turning, plans were being made, men were being hired, violence was gathering like a storm on the horizon. Let it come, he thought. The mountain would be ready. By the time he reached the line shack where Grace and Thomas waited, the sun was high and warm. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof abandoned by prospectors years ago. But it had a fireplace and it was defensible. Grace and Thomas were inside, huddled around a small fire. When Jacob entered, Grace stood. Her face was a mixture of relief and guilt. I am sorry, she said. I ran. I left you. You did exactly what I would have done, Jacob said. Never apologize for surviving. What happened after we left? I was jailed overnight. Doc paid my fine. He looked at Thomas. Where did you learn to pick pockets? The streets of Leadville, Thomas said. He looked embarrassed. I am not proud of it. Be proud, Jacob said. It saved us. He moved to the fire, warming his hands. Now we need to plan. Blackwood is gathering men, professional killers. They will come for the mountain within days. How many? Grace asked. 15 at least. And we are 3, Thomas said. His voice cracked slightly. No, Jacob said. He looked at them both. We are not 3. We are going to get help. From people Blackwood cannot buy, cannot threaten. People who have their own reasons to want him stopped. The Ute, Grace said. Your wife's people. Jacob nodded. Chief Ironhawk, Red Willow's father. He is old now, but he is still strong, still respected. And Blackwood's mining operations have destroyed sacred burial sites. The Ute have grievances of their own. Will they help? Thomas asked. I do not know, Jacob said honestly, but I am going to ask. They rested for 2 hours, then began the journey back to the mountain. It took 6 hours on the ridge trail, moving slowly, watching for riders. When they finally reached the cabin as the sun was setting, Jacob felt something loosen in his chest. Home. He was home. But the relief was short-lived. As they approached the cabin, Jacob saw fresh tracks in the snow. Boot prints, many of them. Someone had been here. Recently. He dismounted, drew his rifle. Stay here, he said to Grace and Thomas. He approached the cabin carefully, watching the windows, the door. No movement, no sound. He pushed the door open with his foot. The cabin had been ransacked. Furniture overturned, supplies scattered. His books torn from their shelves, pages ripped out. Red Willow's possessions, the few things he had kept, thrown on the floor. And on the table, held down by his own knife driven deep into the wood, was a note. Jacob pulled out the knife and read the note. The handwriting was elegant, educated. Morrow. You have 48 hours. Leave or burn. Your choice. N. Blackwood. Jacob crumpled the paper in his fist. His eyes moved across the destroyed cabin. They had touched Red Willow's things, the beaded moccasins she had made with her own hands, the wooden bowl Samuel had eaten from as a child, the blanket she had woven during her last winter, its pattern telling the story of their family in the old way. He knelt and picked up the moccasins from where they had been thrown on the floor. Dirt was ground into the intricate beadwork. One of the ties was torn. He held them in his large, scarred hands, these delicate things that had once held his wife's feet, and for a moment he could not breathe. Grace and Thomas entered behind him. They stared at the destruction in silence. Then Grace began to pick up the scattered belongings, her movements mechanical. Thomas righted the overturned chairs. Jacob stood at the table holding the note, feeling rage build in him like pressure in a sealed container. 48 hours, he said, not enough time to run, just enough time to prepare. Prepare for what? Grace asked. She sounded very tired. For the last stand, Jacob said. He looked at her. I am going to find Chief Ironhawk tomorrow. I am going to ask for his help. If he agrees, we will have a chance. If he refuses, we fight anyway. But either way, this ends in 2 days. One way or another, this ends. That night, they worked in shifts, repairing what could be repaired, fortifying what could be fortified. Jacob showed Thomas how to create firing ports in the walls, narrow slits that would allow them to shoot out while remaining protected. He showed Grace how to prepare medical supplies, how to organize bandages and water, and the things they would need if people were wounded. At midnight, Jacob went outside. The stars were brilliant, countless, cold. He walked to the ridge where he had buried Red Willow and Samuel. The graves were simple, marked only with stones. He knelt between them. He had not done this in 8 years, had not allowed himself. But now, with everything coming to an end, he needed to speak to them one last time. I failed you, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. I was not here when you needed me. I have spent 8 years trying to live with that, trying to understand why I survived and you did not. I do not have answers. I only have this. I am here now. I am not running. I am not hiding. Whatever comes, I will face it. And if I die protecting people who need protecting. Just like you protected Samuel. Maybe that is enough. Maybe that makes the years between worthwhile. He stood. He wiped his eyes. Then he heard footsteps in the snow behind him. Grace, she had followed him. I'm sorry, she said. I did not mean to intrude. You are not intruding. He gestured to the graves, my family, what is left of them. Grace knelt. She placed her hand on the cold stone that marked Red Willow's grave. She was brave, Grace said. I can tell. Only a brave woman would love a man like you. What do you mean a man like me? A man who feels everything but shows nothing. A man who carries the world on his shoulders and never asks for help. A man who thinks he does not deserve happiness because he could not save everyone. Grace looked up at him. She loved you, and I think if she could speak to you now, she would tell you to live. Really live, not just survive, not just exist, but live. Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I do not know how, neither do I, Grace said, but maybe we can learn together. She stood. They faced each other in the starlight, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. Then Grace did something that surprised both of them. She reached out and took his hand. Jacob looked down at their joined hands. Her skin was cold. His was warm. Together they were something in between. Tomorrow might be our last day, Grace said. I want you to know that finding you, finding this place, it gave me something I thought I had lost. Hope. The belief that goodness still exists. That people can still choose to help each other for no reason, except that it is right. You did not lose that, Jacob said. You proved it. You saved Thomas. You stood up to Blackwood. You ran when you should have run. You are the brave one. No, Grace said, we both are. And that is enough. They stood there for a moment longer, hands joined, the cold night pressing in around them. Then they walked back to the cabin together. As they walked, their hands still joined, Jacob found himself acutely aware of her presence beside him. The way she moved, the sound of her breathing in the cold air, the warmth of her hand in his. He had not held anyone's hand in 8 years, not since Red Willow. He had forgotten what it felt like. This simple human connection, this quiet intimacy. Grace seemed to sense his thoughts. She squeezed his hand gently. Is this all right, she asked, me holding your hand? Yes, Jacob said. His voice was rough. It is all right. They walked the rest of the way in silence. But when they reached the cabin door, neither of them let go immediately. They stood there in the darkness, their joined hands between them, both aware that something had shifted, something neither of them was quite ready to name. Finally, Grace released his hand. She smiled at him, a small, uncertain smile. Good night, Jacob. Good night, Grace. She went inside. Jacob stood on the porch for a long moment, looking at his hand where hers had been. Then he followed her inside. Thomas was asleep by the fire, his young face peaceful. Jacob banked the embers. Grace lay down on the bed. Jacob took his position by the door, rifle across his lap. Tomorrow he would find Chief Iron Hawk. Tomorrow he would ask for help. Tomorrow he would prepare for war. But tonight, for a few precious hours, there was peace. And in the warm darkness of the cabin, with two people he had come to care for sleeping nearby, Jacob Morrow allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would survive what was coming. Outside, the wind rose. The temperature dropped. And far below in the valley, men with guns and bad intentions began their preparations for the climb. Dawn came cold and absolute. Jacob woke to find frost on the inside of the sawing windows, intricate patterns like frozen ferns that disappeared under his breath. He had slept 3 hours, no more, his body trained by years of solitary vigilance to wake at the slightest change in the air. Grace and Thomas were still sleeping, exhausted from the previous day's ordeal. He let them rest. They would need their strength. He stepped outside. The world was crystalline, every surface covered in hoarfrost that caught the early light and threw it back in 1,000 directions, beautiful and deadly. The temperature had dropped to perhaps 10 degrees below zero during the night. Any man caught unprepared in this cold would be dead by morning. Jacob hoped Blackwood's hired guns knew that. Hoped they would underestimate the mountain. Underestimation was often the first step toward death up here. He walked the perimeter of his land, checking the fence line, looking for new tracks. Nothing. The snow from 2 days ago had frozen into a hard crust that would bear a man's weight without breaking, which meant tracking would be nearly impossible. Anyone approaching would leave no trace until they were close. Very close. When he returned to the cabin, Grace was awake, tending the fire. She had changed into the practical clothes she had worn during their journey to Ironwood. Red Willow's old dress and coat. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. She looked like she belonged here, Jacob thought, like the mountain had claimed her. You are going to the Ute camp today, she said. It was not a question. Yes, it is a 4-hour ride. I should be back by evening. And if Chief Ironhawk refuses to help, then I come back and we prepare as best we can with what we have. Grace poured coffee, handed him a cup. The steam rose between them. Will you tell me about him? Chief Ironhawk. What kind of man is he? Jacob sat at the table. He is old, perhaps 65. He was a warrior in his youth, fought against the army when they tried to force his people onto reservations. He lost 2 sons in those battles. After the fighting ended, he became a leader who chose survival over pride. He negotiated treaties, kept his people alive when others chose to fight and die. Some called him a collaborator. Others called him wise. He paused. He is Red Willow's father. When she married me, half the tribe turned against her. They said she had betrayed her people, but Ironhawk stood by her. He said love was not betrayal, that the world was changing and the only sin was refusing to change with it. Did you see him after she died? No, I could not face him. I was the reason his daughter was dead. I was the reason his grandson was dead. I disappeared into these mountains and I did not come back. Grace set down her cup. Then perhaps going to him now is not just about asking for help. Perhaps it is about asking for forgiveness. I do not deserve forgiveness. Maybe not, but maybe he needs to give it anyway. For his own peace. Jacob looked at her. You see very clearly for someone who spent 6 years behind convent walls. Pain sharpens vision, Grace said. You learn to see what matters when everything else has been stripped away. Thomas emerged from his sleeping pallet, rubbing his eyes. He looked younger in the morning light, less like the hardened survivor and more like the boy he should have been. Morning, he said. His voice was rough with sleep. Jacob stood. Thomas, you stay here with Grace. Bar the door after I leave. Do not open it for anyone except me. If riders come and I am not back, You use the tunnel. Understood. Yes, sir, Thomas said. But his face showed worry. What if something happens to you? What if you do not come back? Then you take care of Grace. You get her to safety. You survive. That is the most important thing. Survival. Thomas nodded but did not look convinced. Jacob understood. The boy had lost everyone. The thought of losing Jacob too, of being abandoned again, was almost unbearable. Jacob put a hand on his shoulder, felt the thin frame beneath the shirt. I will come back, Jacob said. I promise. Do not make promises you cannot keep, Grace said quietly. Then I promise to try, Jacob said. That is all anyone can do. He saddled Judah and rode out as the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The trail to the Ute winter camp led north and west, following the valleys between mountains, staying below the tree line where the wind was less savage. He pushed Judah hard, knowing time was against them. Blackwood's 48-hour deadline was already half gone. The Ute camp was hidden in a box canyon, sheltered from the wind, with a stream that ran year-round and good grazing for the horses. Jacob had been here once before, years ago, when Red Willow had brought him to meet her family. He remembered the fear he had felt, walking into a camp of people who had every reason to hate him, who had lost sons and brothers and fathers to men who looked like him. But Ironhawk had welcomed him, had said, My daughter has chosen you. That is enough for me. As Jacob approached the camp now, he saw smoke rising from the lodges. A sentry stepped out from behind a boulder, rifle ready. He was young, perhaps 20, with pain on his face and distrust in his eyes. He spoke in the Ute language, rapid and harsh. Jacob raised his hand in peace. He responded in halting Ute, the words coming slowly after years of disuse. I seek Chief Ironhawk. I am Jacob Morrow, husband to Red Willow. The sentry's face changed. Recognition, surprise, perhaps anger. He gestured for Jacob to follow. The camp consisted of 8 lodges arranged in a circle around a central fire pit. Women were working, scraping hides, tending children. Men sat in groups, repairing weapons, talking quietly. When Jacob entered the circle, conversation stopped. Everyone turned to stare. An old man emerged from the largest lodge. He was tall and lean, his face a landscape of wrinkles, his long gray hair bound in braids decorated with feathers and beads. He wore traditional clothing, buckskin and fur, and he moved with the careful dignity of age. His eyes, when they found Jacob, were sharp and knowing. Jacob Morrow, Chief Ironhawk, said in English, You come to me after 8 winters of silence. The words were not accusatory, simply factual. Jacob dismounted. He stood before Ironhawk, feeling the weight of years and grief pressing down on him. I come to ask for help, he said, and to apologize. For which sin do you apologize? For marrying my daughter, for failing to protect her, for surviving when she did not, or for abandoning her father in his grief? All of them, Jacob said. His throat was tight. If I could undo any of it, I would. Ironhawk studied him. Then he nodded once sharply. Come, we will talk. He led Jacob into the lodge. Inside it was warm and dark, lit only by a small fire in the center. They sat on opposite sides of the flames. Ironhawk filled a pipe, lit it, passed it to Jacob. They smoked in silence, the tobacco harsh and bitter. It was a ritual, a cleansing. Finally, Ironhawk spoke. You think you failed Red Willow because you were not there when the fire came. You think if you had been home, you could have saved her. Yes, Jacob said. You are wrong. Ironhawk's voice was firm. Red Willow knew who you were. She knew you were a hunter, a scout, a man who went into the wilderness. She chose to marry you knowing this. She chose to live in that cabin knowing the dangers. She made her choices with open eyes. Her death was not your failure. It was the evil of the men who set that fire. Do not dishonor her memory by taking their guilt onto yourself. Jacob felt something break open inside him. 8 years of carrying that weight, and now an old man was telling him to put it down. I do not know how to stop blaming myself, he said. By living well, by honoring her with the life you live now, by protecting others as you could not protect her. Ironhawk leaned forward. Why are you here, Jacob Morrow? What do you need from me? So Jacob told him. About Blackwood's claim to the land, about Grace and Thomas, about the hired guns coming up the mountain, about the deadline that would expire tomorrow at dawn. When he finished, Ironhawk sat in silence, his face unreadable. "This man Blackwood," Ironhawk said finally. His father was Colonel Arthur Blackwood, the one who ordered the attack on the winter camp at Beaver Creek 12 years ago. The one who said the Ute must be removed so the land could be mined. "Yes," Jacob said. "The same family. Then this is not just your war, it is ours." Ironhawk stood. He moved to the lodge entrance, pushed aside the flap. Outside, the camp continued its daily rhythm. "My people are tired of fighting," he said. "We have fought for generations. We have lost. We have been pushed into smaller and smaller spaces, told to be grateful for what little we have left." He turned back to Jacob. "But there are some fights you cannot walk away from. Some enemies who will never stop taking until there is nothing left. I believe Nathaniel Blackwood is such an enemy. Will you help me?" Jacob asked. "I will, but not for you." Ironhawk's eyes were hard. "For my daughter, for the memory of what was taken from her, and for my people who are tired of watching white men steal what does not belong to them." "How many warriors can you spare?" 8. Young men who remember the old ways, who are tired of reservation life. They will fight. 8 men, plus himself, Grace, Thomas, 11 against 15 or 20. The odds were not good, but they were better than before. "Thank you," Jacob said. "Do not thank me yet. Many of us will die." Ironhawk sat again. "Tell me about this woman, this Grace. Why does she matter to you?" Jacob hesitated. "Because she reminds me that there are still people worth saving. Because she chose to help Thomas when she could have saved herself. Because she is brave in ways I never was." "You love her," Ironhawk said. "I do not know, maybe. It has been so long since I let myself feel anything like that, I am not sure I would recognize it." "Red Willow would want you to love again," Ironhawk said. "She was not a jealous woman. She believed love was infinite, not finite. That giving love to someone else did not diminish what you shared with her." "I am not ready," Jacob said. "None of us are ever ready for the things that change us. But they come anyway." Ironhawk smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. "Go back to your mountain, Jacob Morrow. Prepare your defenses. We will come at nightfall. And tomorrow, when the sun rises, we will show Nathaniel Blackwood that there are still men who will not bow." Jacob rode back faster than he had come, pushing Judah to the edge of endurance. The sun was already setting when he reached the cabin. Grace and Thomas were watching from the window, their faces tight with worry. When they saw him, relief washed over them. He told them about Ironhawk's promise. 8 Ute warriors would arrive after dark. Together they would prepare the cabin for siege. They would set traps on the approach trails. They would create fallback positions. They would do everything possible to even the odds. Thomas listened in silence as Jacob and Ironhawk discussed the defensive positions. His face was pale, his jaw tight. When they finished, there was a long pause. Then Thomas stood. "Sir," he said. His voice was quiet but steady. "I want to fight." "No," Jacob said immediately. His tone left no room for argument. "You stay in the root cellar with the medical supplies. If the cabin is breached, you take Grace and use the tunnel." Thomas shook his head slowly. "I am not hiding." "You are 16 years old," Jacob said. His voice hardened. "You have never been in real combat. You would be killed in the first minute." "Maybe," Thomas said, "but I would rather die fighting for people I love than live knowing I hid while they died for me." His voice broke slightly on the last words. Jacob felt his patience snap. "This is not about bravery, boy. This is about survival. I did not save your life so you could throw it away." "You did not save my life," Thomas said. He was shaking now, but not from fear, from anger, from frustration, from something deeper. "You gave me a life, Mom. There is a difference. Before I met you, I was nothing. No family, no home, no future. I was just waiting to die. You changed that. You taught me what it means to have something worth living for. And now you are telling me I cannot fight for it." Jacob stared at him. He saw the boy he had operated on 6 weeks ago, fever burning through him, leg rotting. He saw the boy learning to read by firelight, the boy whittling by the fire, the boy who had pickpocketed a deputy to save Grace. That boy was gone. In his place stood someone harder, someone who understood what was at stake. Grace spoke into the silence. Let him fight, Jacob. Jacob turned on her. You want him to die. Grace met his eyes without flinching. I want him to choose. She looked at Thomas with something like pride in her face. He is not a child anymore, Jacob. He stopped being a child the moment he stepped in that trap and decided to survive instead of surrender. You cannot protect him from the world forever. Eventually, you have to trust that what you taught him is enough. And if it is not enough, Jacob said, if he dies, then he dies knowing he stood for something, Grace said quietly, knowing he chose his own path. That is more than most people get. Jacob looked at Ironhawk. The old chief had been silent through this exchange. What do you think? Jacob asked. Ironhawk studied Thomas for a long moment. Then he spoke in Ute, the words formal and ceremonial. He is afraid, Ironhawk said, but he does not let fear choose for him. That is the mark of a warrior, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to bow to it. He turned to Jacob. You asked me to send warriors, men who would stand when others run. He gestured at Thomas. You already have one, right here. Jacob closed his eyes. He thought about the battle ahead, the blood, the screaming, the dying. He thought about watching Thomas fall, about burying another boy he had come to love. But he also thought about Red Willow, about how she had chosen her own path even when her people rejected her, about how she had taught him that love meant trusting people to make their own choices, even dangerous ones. He opened his eyes and looked at Thomas. All right, he said. His voice was rough with emotion. You fight, but you follow my orders exactly. No improvising, no heroics. You stay alive. That is the primary objective. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Thomas said. For the first time since the argument began, he smiled. A small, uncertain smile, but there was steel underneath it. Jacob pulled him close, hugged him hard enough to hurt. If you die on me, boy, I will never forgive you, he whispered. I will not die, Thomas whispered back. You taught me how to survive. Remember, when Jacob released him, there were tears on both their faces, but there was also understanding and respect and something else, something that looked very much like the bond between father and son. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. Jacob showed Thomas how to load and fire the rifles, how to aim for center mass, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. Grace organized the medical supplies, tore cloth into bandages, boiled water, prepared the root cellar as a field hospital. The work was mechanical but necessary. It kept their hands busy and their minds from dwelling on what was coming. As promised, Chief Ironhawk and 8 warriors arrived after nightfall. They came silently, materializing from the darkness like ghosts. The warriors were young, between 18 and 25, lean and hard, with faces painted for war. They carried a mixture of firearms and traditional weapons, bows and knives and war clubs. Ironhawk embraced Jacob. It was brief but meaningful. Then he assessed the cabin with a warrior's eye. Good position, he said. High ground, clear fields of fire, only one approach that does not require climbing cliffs. But the cabin itself is vulnerable. Too many windows, too much wood. We will reinforce what we can, Jacob said, and we will set traps on the trail, make them pay for every yard they advance. They worked through the night. The Ute warriors moved through the darkness with practiced efficiency, setting snares and deadfalls and false trails. Jacob and Thomas fortified the cabin walls, stuffing gaps with mud and moss, creating firing ports that would protect the shooter while allowing clear lines of sight. Grace prepared food, knowing that once the fighting started, there would be no time to cook. By dawn, they were as ready as they would ever be. 13 people against an unknown number of attackers. The cabin had been transformed into a fortress. The approach trail was a gauntlet of traps. Every person had an assigned position and a clear understanding of the plan. If the cabin was breached, they would fall back to the root cellar. If the cellar was breached, they would escape through the tunnel. If the tunnel was blocked, they would fight to the last. Jacob stood on the porch as the sun rose, watching the valley below. He could see riders gathering at the tree line, perhaps half a mile away. He counted them through his spyglass. 23 men, more than they had expected. Blackwood had spared no expense. But the riders did not advance immediately. They held position at the tree line, waiting. Then Jacob saw movement. A single rider separating from the group, approaching slowly up the trail. A white cloth tied to the barrel of a rifle. A flag of truce. Jacob's jaw tightened. He recognized the horse. The expensive thoroughbred. The rider's posture. Nathaniel Blackwood had come himself. Jacob stepped down from the porch. Grace appeared at the door behind him. "Jacob," she said. Her voice was tight with fear. "Stay inside," Jacob said. But Grace ignored him. She came down the steps and stood beside him. Thomas followed. Then Ironhawk, his face carved from stone. Blackwood stopped 30 yards away. He sat his horse with the ease of wealth and privilege, a man who had never known real hardship. Even now, surrounded by armed men, about to launch an assault that would kill people, he looked calm, confident. "Morrow," Blackwood called out, his voice carried in the thin mountain air. "I have come to offer terms, a final offer before unnecessary bloodshed." "You have nothing I want," Jacob said. "I have the law. I have power. I have 23 men willing to die for money." Blackwood gestured at the cabin, at the small group of defenders. "You have courage. I will grant you that. But courage is not enough, so here are my terms. Give me Grace Devereaux. That is all I want. You and the boy can leave with your lives and $10,000. Enough to start over anywhere in the territories. The land is mine regardless. The courts have ruled. This is your last chance to be reasonable." Grace stepped forward. Her voice rang out clear and strong across the frozen meadow. "I will never go with you, Nathaniel. I am not property. I am not a prize to be won. I am a human being with the right to choose my own life." Blackwood's mask of civility cracked. His face flushed. "You have no rights, Grace. You never did. Your father promised you to me when you were 16 years old. I paid for your education, your food, your shelter at that convent. You are mine. You have always been mine. And I always collect what is owed to me." "My father had no right to sell me," Grace said, "and your money bought nothing but your own delusion." Blackwood's hands tightened on the reins. His horse shifted uneasily. "Morrow," he said, turning his attention back to Jacob, "you seem like a practical man, a military man. You understand odds. You cannot win this fight. Give me what is mine and live. Refuse and die. It is that simple." Jacob felt Grace's hand slip into his. He felt Thomas standing close on his other side. He felt Ironhawk's presence at his back. He thought about Red Willow, about Samuel, about all the people who had been taken from him by men like Blackwood. Men who believed that money and power meant they could take whatever they wanted. "No," Jacob said. His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder. "You want her, you come and take her. But understand this. Every man you send up this mountain, I will send back dead. Your money means nothing here. Your power means nothing here. This is my land, and I will defend it." "You are a fool," Blackwood said. "Maybe," Jacob agreed, "but I am a fool who is still standing. How many of your men can say the same by sundown?" Blackwood stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. It was a terrible smile, empty of humanity. "So be it. I will add your corpses to the pile with all the others who stood in my way." He began to turn his horse. "Nathaniel," Grace called out. He stopped, looked back. "This is the last time you will hear my voice," Grace said. "So listen carefully. I do not hate you. I pity you, because you have spent your whole life accumulating things, and you have never understood that things cannot love you back. You will die alone and unloved and forgotten, and I will die free." Blackwood's face twisted with rage. He spurred his horse and galloped back down the trail to his men. Jacob watched him go. Then he turned to Grace. "That was brave," he said. Grace was trembling, but her voice was steady. "I meant every word." "I know," Jacob said. He looked at Thomas, at Ironhawk, at the Ute warriors watching from the rocks. "Today we fight, not for land, not for principle, for each other, for the right to choose our own lives. If we fall knowing we stood for something real." Ironhawk placed his hand on Jacob's shoulder. "We will not fall," he said. "The mountain chooses who lives and who dies, and the mountain is with us." Jacob nodded. He lowered the glass and went inside. Everyone was at their positions. Grace at the south window, Thomas at the north, Ironhawk and 4 warriors inside the cabin. 4 more warriors hidden in the rocks outside, ready to flank any assault. Jacob checked his rifle one last time. The weight of it was familiar, comforting. He had carried variations of this weapon for 20 years. It had saved his life more times than he could count. Today it would do so again, or it would not, and he would die with it in his hands. Grace looked at him across the room. Her face was calm, resolved. "If we do not survive this," she said, "I want you to know that I am grateful for everything, for saving me, for giving me a choice, for showing me that there are still good men in the world." "We will survive," Jacob said. "But if we do not, I want you to know that meeting you reminded me what I was fighting for all those years ago. Not territory, not principle, but people. Individual people who deserve to live free." The moment stretched between them. Then Thomas's voice cut through. "They are coming." Jacob moved to the window. The riders had started up the trail, moving slowly, cautiously. They knew about the traps, or suspected. Good. Caution would slow them down, give the defenders time to inflict casualties from range. The first trap was triggered at 200 yards. A deadfall, a heavy log suspended above the trail, released when a tripwire was cut. It swung down and caught a horse broadside, breaking the animal's legs, throwing the rider into the rocks. The horse screamed. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, terrible and piteous. The riders stopped, milling in confusion. Jacob raised his rifle. He sighted on a man who appeared to be giving orders, a big man in a leather coat. The range was long, perhaps 250 yards, and the wind was gusting, but Jacob had made harder shots. He breathed out slowly, let his heart rate settle, squeezed the trigger. The rifle boomed. The man in the leather coat jerked backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground. The battle had begun. For the next 2 hours, it was a war of attrition. Blackwood's men tried to advance up the trail and were driven back by rifle fire from the cabin and from the hidden Ute warriors in the rocks. They tried to flank to the east and triggered bear traps that broke ankles and sent men screaming back down the mountain. They tried to flank to the west and found themselves on a false trail that ended at a cliff edge. 2 men fell, their bodies disappearing into the void. But slowly, inevitably, they advanced. There were too many of them. They used their dead as cover, dragging bodies into position and firing from behind them. They laid down suppressing fire, forcing the defenders to duck while other men rushed forward. By noon, they had reached the edge of the meadow, 100 yards from the cabin. Inside, the air was thick with gunpowder smoke. Jacob's ears rang from the concussion of rifle fire in the enclosed space. His shoulder ached from the recoil. Beside him, Grace was reloading, her hands steady, her face streaked with powder residue. Thomas was at the north window, firing with the concentrated intensity of someone who had discovered they were good at something terrible. Outside, one of the Ute warriors, a young man named Standing Bear, fell with a bullet through his throat. He died quickly, silently, his blood steaming in the cold air. The other warriors dragged his body behind a boulder and continued fighting. "Jacob!" Grace called. Her voice was tight. "They are circling, 10 men moving north." Iron Hawk was already moving. He barked orders in Ute, and 3 warriors slipped out the back door, disappearing into the rocks. There would be an ambush. The flanking party would walk into a killing ground, but that left only 10 defenders in the cabin, and there were still at least 15 attackers in the meadow, and they were getting closer. A voice called out from the rocks below, "Morrow." It was Silas Greer, Blackwood's foreman. "You cannot win this. You are outnumbered." But before Greer could finish, another figure stepped out from behind the boulders. Nathaniel Blackwood himself, dressed in a fine riding coat, a rifle cradled in his arms. He had come to witness Jacob's defeat in person. "Morrow," Blackwood shouted across the meadow. His voice was tight with rage. "I wanted to see your face when you lose everything, again." Jacob moved to the door, cracked it open. "You made a mistake coming here, Blackwood. The only mistake was letting you live this long." Blackwood gestured to the ruined meadow, the bodies of his men. "You have cost me money, Morrow. Time, reputation. When this is over, I am going to burn what is left. Just like my father did. Some lessons bear repeating." Grace appeared beside Jacob in the doorway. Her voice rang out clear and defiant. "I will never be yours, Nathaniel. I would rather die." Blackwood's face contorted with fury. "Then die you shall." He turned to Greer. "End this. Kill them all. Burn everything. I want nothing left but ashes. Greer did not move. He stood 30 yards away, rifle in hand, staring at Blackwood with an expression that was difficult to read. Exhaustion. Disgust. Something darker. Greer, Blackwood snapped. I gave you an order. Are you deaf? You have not paid us, Greer said. His voice was flat, empty. 3 weeks of work. You promised $500 a man. We have seen nothing. Blackwood's face flushed red. You will be paid when the job is complete. No. Greer shook his head slowly. Half the men are dead. The other half are bleeding. And you stand there giving orders like we are still your property. He looked at the surviving mercenaries around him. How many of you have been paid what you were promised? Silence. The men looked at each other. No one spoke. You are all cowards, Blackwood spat. I own this valley. I own the law. I own you. You own nothing, Greer said quietly. Then Silas Greer raised his rifle and shot Nathaniel Blackwood through the chest. The crack of the gunshot echoed off the canyon walls. Blackwood staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. He looked down at the spreading bloodstain on his expensive coat. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. Only blood. He fell forward into the snow. His body twitched once, twice, then went still. The entire meadow froze. Attackers and defenders alike stared at the body crumpled in the red-stained snow. Greer lowered his rifle. He looked across the meadow at Jacob. We are done here, Morrow. Keep your mountain. He turned to the surviving mercenaries. Any man who wants to keep fighting for a corpse, stay. The rest of you, ride. One by one, the mercenaries lowered their weapons. They had come for money. The man who promised payment was dead. There was nothing left to fight for. Within minutes, they were gathering their wounded, collecting their horses, preparing to leave. Greer looked back at Jacob one last time. He did not smile, did not nod. He simply turned and walked down the mountain, leaving Blackwood's body where it fell. Inside the cabin, Thomas broke the silence. Is it over? Jacob watched the mercenaries disappear down the trail. Not yet, he said, but soon. Then Grace screamed, fire! Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, punched through windows, ricocheted off the stone fireplace. Around grazed Thomas's shoulder, spinning him around. He cried out and fell. Grace was on him instantly, tearing open his shirt. Just a graze, she said, but it bled freely. She pressed a cloth to the wound. Hold this. Press hard. Thomas nodded, his face pale but determined. I am all right, he said. I can still shoot. You will do as you are told, Grace said. She tied the bandage tight and pushed him back to his position. The assault came 5 minutes later. 12 men rushed the cabin at once, firing as they ran, using speed and numbers to overwhelm the defenders. Jacob dropped 2. Iron Hawk dropped 1. The Ute warriors outside killed 3 more. But 6 men reached the porch. Jacob had seconds to react. He dropped his rifle and drew his knife. The first man through the door was huge, almost as large as Jacob, with a scarred face and wild eyes. He swung a club. Jacob ducked under it, drove his knife into the man's side, twisted, yanked it free. The man fell, clutching the wound, blood pouring between his fingers. The second man came through before Jacob could recover. He tackled Jacob, driving him backward into the table. They crashed to the floor. The man's hands found Jacob's throat and squeezed. Jacob could not breathe. His vision began to darken at the edges. He clawed at the man's face, his fingers finding eyes, digging in. The man screamed and loosened his grip. Then there was a thunderous boom and the man's head exploded. Grace stood over them, Jacob's shotgun smoking in her hands. Her face was spattered with blood, but her expression was eerily calm. She looked at Jacob. Are you hurt? Jacob shoved the corpse off him and stood. No, thank you. Another man burst through the door. Thomas shot him from across the room, the bullet catching him in the chest, spinning him back out onto the porch. A fourth man tried to enter and was met by Iron Hawk's war club, which caved in the side of his skull with a sickening crunch. The assault broke. The remaining attackers fled back to the rocks, dragging their wounded with them. Jacob counted bodies, 7 men down, 6 in or near the cabin, 1 more outside. That left perhaps 16 attackers still in the fight, and the defenders had taken casualties too. 1 Ute warrior dead, Thomas wounded, And Grace. Jacob realized Grace was bleeding, her left arm high up near the shoulder. She must have been grazed while she was shooting. She had not said anything, had not shown any sign of pain. Now she looked down at the wound with mild surprise. "Oh," she said, "I did not notice." "Sit," Jacob ordered. He tore away the sleeve of her dress. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow through the muscle. Painful but not life-threatening. He cleaned it, packed it with cloth, tied it off. Grace watched him work, her face pale but composed. "That man," she said quietly, "the one I shot, I killed him. Yes, I killed a human being. You saved my life. There is a difference, is there?" Grace looked at her hands. They were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "I took a vow to heal, to nurture life, and I just ended one." Grace stared at her hands. There was blood on them. Not her blood, not Jacob's blood. The blood of the man whose head she had destroyed with the shotgun blast. She could still see the moment, the way his skull had come apart, the way his body had fallen, the absolute finality of it. She had taken a life, with her own hands, with her own choice. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The weight of it pressed down on her like a physical thing. "I can still see his face," she whispered, "right before I pulled the trigger." He looked surprised, like he had not expected a nun to kill him. Jacob took her hands in his, stopped the shaking through sheer steadiness. "Listen to me. That man came here to kill, to burn, to destroy. You did not murder him. You stopped him. That is not sin. That is survival. And if God judges you for it, then God is not worthy of worship." Grace met his eyes. Tears were running down her face now. "I am so tired, Jacob. Tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of being afraid." "I know," Jacob said, "but you are strong, stronger than you think. And this will be over soon, one way or another." Jacob moved to the window to watch the mercenaries retreat down the trail. They were truly leaving. The battle was won. Then Grace's voice cut through the relief. "Smoke. I smell smoke." Jacob spun around. Tendrils of gray smoke were seeping through the ceiling boards near the stone chimney. Someone, a dying mercenary perhaps, had thrown a torch onto the roof in a final act of spite. "The roof?" "Oof," Thomas shouted. "It is on fire." Jacob ran outside. Flames were already visible through gaps in the cedar shingles, spreading fast. The wood was bone dry from weeks without rain. He could hear the fire crackling in the rafters, growing, feeding. "Water!" he shouted. "Get water from the barrels." But even as Grace and Thomas scrambled to help, Jacob knew it was too late. The fire had found the dry timbers inside the roof cavity. It roared to life with terrifying speed, spreading from one end of the cabin to the other in less than a minute. "Everyone out," Jacob commanded. His voice was iron. "Now, take nothing, just get out." They evacuated in seconds. Grace helped the wounded Thomas down the porch steps. Ironhawk and the Ute warriors carried their injured. They gathered in the meadow 50 yards away, watching as flames engulfed the structure. Jacob stood transfixed. The cabin was fully involved now, fire shooting from every window, black smoke pouring into the cold blue soil. The heat was intense even at this distance. He could feel it on his face like the breath of a furnace. 8 years. He had spent 8 years building this place. Every log hewn by hand, every stone in the fireplace carried from the creek, every board planed and fitted. It had been his fortress, his sanctuary, his prison, his home, and now it was burning. Grace came to stand beside him. She said nothing. She simply reached out and took his hand. The roof collapsed inward with a sound like an avalanche. Sparks exploded skyward in a fountain of orange and red, swirling on columns of superheated air. The walls groaned and leaned. One side fell outward, then another. Within 20 minutes, there was nothing left but the stone fireplace, standing alone in a pile of smoking rubble and ash. "I am so sorry," Grace whispered. Her voice was thick with tears. "Jacob, I am so sorry." Jacob could not look away from the ruins. This was the second time. The second time fire had taken everything he had built. The second time he had stood helpless and watched his life burn. But this time was different. This time, the people he cared about were alive, standing beside him, breathing, whole. It is just wood, he said finally. His voice was rough, just logs and nails. He turned to face Grace, to face Thomas pale-faced and shocked, to face Iron Hawk and the warriors who had fought beside him. You are alive. That is what matters. Not the building can be replaced. You cannot. But where will we go? Thomas asked, his voice cracked. What will we do? Jacob looked at the ruins, then at the mountains rising around them, then at the faces of the people who had become his family. We rebuild, he said, and this time we build bigger. We build strong enough for everyone who needs shelter. Not just us, anyone who needs refuge. We build a real sanctuary. Grace squeezed his hand. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. Then that is what we will do. It was in this moment, standing in the smoking ruins of everything he owned, that Jacob heard the sound of many horses approaching fast. Federal marshals. The fighting stopped as if a switch had been thrown. The attackers lowered their weapons, confused. The defenders did the same. Into this sudden silence rode Marshal Elijah Graves, a weathered man of 55 with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of human evil and been impressed by none of it. He was flanked by 10 deputies, all armed, all looking ready to use those arms. Graves surveyed the scene. Bodies on the porch, blood in the snow, smoke rising from the cabin. He dismounted and walked forward, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. I received a telegraph from Father Malone 3 days ago, Graves said. His voice carried in the thin air. Allegations of corruption, bribery, attempted murder, and land theft. I rode through the night to get here. He looked at the attackers, still hiding in the rocks. You men, drop your weapons and come out. You are under arrest for trespassing, assault, and attempted murder. We are working for Nathaniel Blackwood, one man called out. We have a legal right to be here. Mr. Blackwood does not have legal authority to hire private armies, Graves said. Graves. Only territorial and the federal governments can authorize use of force in land disputes. You are mercenaries engaged in illegal activity. Surrender or be shot. Slowly, reluctantly, the men emerged from cover. They threw down their guns and raised their hands. Graves's deputies moved among them, applying handcuffs, searching for hidden weapons. Graves approached the cabin. Jacob met him at the door. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Graves said, You look like hell, Morrow. I feel worse, Jacob said. Graves looked past him at the carnage inside. Grace, covered in blood. Thomas with his shoulder bandaged. Iron Hawk leaning on his war club, exhausted. How many dead? Graves asked. 8 of theirs, 1 of ours. Maybe 6 or 7 wounded on both sides. And Blackwood. Dead, down in the meadow. Greer shot him. Graves raised an eyebrow. Greer, his own foreman. Money dispute, Jacob said. Blackwood did not pay his men. Greer settled the debt with a bullet. Graves walked to where Blackwood's body lay in the blood-stained snow. He knelt, checked for a pulse out of habit, found none. Nathaniel Blackwood, he said quietly, son of Colonel Arthur Blackwood. They finally got what they deserved. He stood, looked at Jacob. I have been investigating the Blackwood Mining Corporation for 3 months. Bribery, fraud, illegal claim jumping, destruction of Ute property, and at least 2 murders disguised as mining accidents. I had enough evidence to arrest him. Would have preferred a trial, but this works too. What about his company? Grace asked. Seized by federal government, Graves said. The assets will be liquidated. Victims will receive compensation. Your land, Morrow, is legally yours. The deed stands. Jacob felt something loosen in his chest. It was over. Truly over. The street had filled with townspeople when they returned to Ironwood with Blackwood's body wrapped in canvas. The street had filled with townspeople, watching in stunned silence. For years, Blackwood had been untouchable. Now he was in chains. The balance of power had shifted in an instant. Doc Rivers emerged from his clinic. He looked at Jacob, at Grace, at Thomas. All 3 of them were bandaged, exhausted, but alive. You did it, Doc said. His voice was thick with emotion. You actually did it. We did it, Jacob corrected. All of us. If you had not testified, if Malone had not found those ledgers, if Iron Hawk had not sent his warriors, any one of those things missing, and we would be dead. Sarah Bennett pushed through the crowd. She was crying. Thank you, she said to Jacob. My husband. the man Blackwood killed. Maybe now he can rest. One by one, people came forward. Miners who had been injured in unsafe conditions. Families who had lost land to Blackwood's claim jumping. Native families whose sacred sites had been destroyed. All of them with stories. All of them with grievances. All of them finally able to speak. Graves watched this with satisfaction. Justice is slow, he said to Jacob, but it does come eventually, if good people are willing to stand up. The journey back to the mountain took 2 days. Jacob, Grace, Thomas, and Chief Ironhawk traveled together, along with 2 of the Ute warriors who had survived the battle. Standing Bear's body had been taken back to the Ute camp for proper burial. The others were wounded but would recover. They buried the man Grace had shot on a hillside overlooking the valley. No one knew his name. He had been a mercenary, a man who killed for money, but he was still human, still deserving of dignity. Father Malone, who had ridden up with them, said a prayer. Grace stood at the graveside, her arm in a sling, her face somber. "I am sorry," she said to the grave. "I am sorry your life led you here. I am sorry I had to end it. I will remember you. That is all I can offer." They returned to the mountain to find only ruins. The stone fireplace stood alone among the ashes, a monument to what had been. The clearing was scarred with bullet holes, blood stains, the debris of battle. But the land itself was untouched. The mountains still rose around them. The creek still ran cold and clear. The sky was still vast and blue. They spent the next week cleaning, mending, rebuilding. The work was cathartic, physical labor that required attention, but not thought. Grace swept the blood from the floors. Thomas patched the bullet holes. Jacob rebuilt the shattered window frame. Ironhawk and the warriors repaired the fence line, replacing posts that had been damaged during the fighting. One evening as they sat around the fire, Grace said something that surprised them all. "I want to stay." Jacob looked up from the piece of wood he was whittling. "Stay. Here. On the mountain. Not as a guest. As a partner." She looked at him directly. "You talked about building something. A way station for people who need refuge. I want to help you build it." "You could go anywhere," Jacob said. "You are free now. Boston, Denver, San Francisco. You could start a new life." "I am starting a new life. Here." Grace's voice was firm. "For 6 years I hid in a convent. Then I ran. I am tired of hiding and running. I want to build. I want to create something good." Thomas spoke up. "I want to stay too, if you will have me." Jacob looked at the bone. The wound on his shoulder was healing. In a few weeks there would barely be a scar, but the other scars, the invisible ones, would take longer. "You have family somewhere," Jacob said. "A place you belong." "I belong here," Thomas said. "You saved me. You taught me. You are more family than any blood relative ever was. Please, sir, let me stay." Jacob felt emotion rising in his throat. He swallowed it down, nodded. "All right, you can stay. Both of you." He paused. "But we do this right. We build properly. A place big enough for others. With a real medical clinic, a schoolhouse, a chapel maybe if Grace wants one." "Not a chapel," Grace said. "A meeting house. A place for anyone of any faith or no faith. A place where people can be safe without conditions." "A sanctuary," Thomas said. "Yes," Jacob said. He liked the sound of that. "A sanctuary." Chief Ironhawk stood. He had been silent through this exchange. Now he moved to the door, looked out at the mountains. "My people will help," he said. "We will send men to build. We will teach survival skills to those who come here. We will protect this place." He turned back to Jacob. "But I asked something in return." "Name it," Jacob said. "Remember Red Willow. Remember that she believed in building bridges between peoples. Let this sanctuary be that bridge. White, Ute, Mexican, Chinese, Black, whatever they are. If they need help, they are welcome here." "They are welcome here," Jacob agreed. Over the following months, word spread about the mountain man who had stood against a corrupt tycoon, about the nun who had fought for her freedom, about the Mai who had survived and thrived. People began to arrive. A young Mexican woman, pregnant and fleeing an abusive husband. An old Chinese man, beaten by railroad foremen with nowhere to go. A family of homesteaders who had lost their land to a bank. Jacob, Grace, and Thomas took them all in. They expanded the cabin, adding a dormitory wing for guests. They built a medical clinic where Grace could work. They built a schoolhouse where Thomas could teach reading and writing to the children who came through. Father Malone, sober now for 6 months, moved to the mountain permanently and built a small chapel for those who wanted it. Doc Rivers visited once a month, bringing supplies and news from the valley. Blackwood had been convicted and sentenced to 20 years hard labor in a federal prison. Judge Pemberton had been removed from office. Sheriff Cutler had resigned in disgrace. Ironwood was slowly becoming a place where law meant something again. One evening in early spring, a year after the battle, Jacob and Grace stood on the porch watching the sunset. The snow had melted, revealing the green beneath. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom. The air smelled of pine and possibility. Grace took Jacob's hand. It was not the first time, but it still felt significant. "Are you happy?" she asked. Jacob considered the question. Happy was not a word he had used to describe himself in many years. But looking out at the land he had almost lost, at the buildings they had constructed, at the people moving peacefully through the compound, he thought maybe he was getting close. "I am content," he said. "That is enough." "It is more than enough," Grace agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "We built something good here, Jacob. We took all that pain, all that loss, and we transformed it into something that helps people. That means something." "Red Willow would be proud," Jacob said. "Samuel, too. I think they would." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Jacob, I want to ask you something. Ask. Will you marry me?" Jacob turned to look at her. She was smiling, but her eyes were serious. "That is supposed to be my line," he said. "I do not care about supposed to. I know what I want. I want to build a life with you. Not because I need protection or rescue, but because I choose you. Because you are good and kind and strong in all the ways that matter." Grace squeezed his hand. "So, will you marry me, Jacob Morrow?" Jacob felt his throat tighten. For 8 years, he had told himself he did not deserve happiness, that he had forfeited his right to love when he failed to save Red Willow and Samuel. But Grace was telling him something different, that love was not a reward for perfection. It was a choice, a commitment, a decision to keep building even when the world tried to tear you down. "Yes," he said, "I will marry you, Grace Devereaux." They were married a month later. Father Malone performed the ceremony. Chief Ironhawk and the Ute elders witnessed. Thomas stood as best man, his face split with a grin. Doc Rivers gave Grace away since she had no family present. Sarah Bennett provided the wedding dress, simple blue cotton that Grace wore with pride. The vows were simple. "I promise to choose you every day, to build with you, to stand with you, to love you not despite our scars, but because of them. We have both been broken, but together we are whole." After the ceremony, there was a feast, venison and potatoes and bread, music from a harmonica Thomas had learned to play, dancing in the meadow as the sun set, laughter, joy, the kind of uncomplicated happiness that comes from surviving something terrible and finding grace on the other side. That night, Jacob and Grace lay together in the newly built addition to the cabin, their private room. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sound of the creek. Grace rested her head on Jacob's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a home." "You gave yourself a home," Jacob replied. "I just provided the land." "No, you provided the safety, the space to heal, the courage to keep trying." She kissed his chest. "I love you, Jacob Morrow." "I love you, Grace Morrow," he said. And speaking her new name felt like a promise, a vow, a commitment to the future. 3 years later, the sanctuary had grown to house 20 permanent residents and accepted dozens of temporary guests each year. Grace ran the medical clinic, training others in basic first aid and surgery. Thomas, now 21, managed the school and the supply depot. Ironhawk's Ute people maintained the trails and taught survival skills. Father Malone led services for those who wanted them and counseled those who needed it. And Jacob did what he had always done. He protected, he provided, he built. But now he did it with purpose, with family, with hope. One spring morning, Grace woke Jacob before dawn. She took his hand and placed it on her belly. "There," she said. "Do you feel it?" Jacob felt a flutter under his palm, faint but unmistakable. Life. A child. His child. They had been trying for 2 years. Grace had begun to believe that perhaps children were not meant for her, that perhaps her body had been damaged by the years of stress and fear and running. She had not told Jacob of her worry, had not wanted to burden him with another loss. But then, in the third winter, the signs had come. The missed monthly bleeding, the exhaustion, the strange sensitivity to smells. She had not dared to hope at first, but Doc Rivers had confirmed it. A child? Their child. Are you frightened? Grace asked. After what happened to Samuel. Are you frightened? Grace asked. After what happened to Samuel. Terrified, Jacob admitted, but also grateful. This is a second chance to protect what matters. To be present, to not fail. You will not fail, Grace said. We will not fail. We have built a community here. This child will be surrounded by people who love them, who will teach them and protect them and help them grow. She smiled. We are not alone anymore, Jacob. That changes everything. The child was born in late autumn when the aspens had turned gold and the first snow was dusting the peaks. A girl. They named her Lily Rose after Samuel's little sister who had never been born, and after Red Willow, whose strength and wisdom lived on in this new life. As Jacob held his daughter for the first time, feeling her tiny fingers wrap around his thumb, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. The pain, the loss, the years of isolation, the rage that had nearly consumed him, and then the people who had pulled him back. Grace, Thomas, Ironhawk, all the refugees who had found their way to this mountain and helped transform it from a fortress into a sanctuary. Lily Rose opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked with the strange intensity of newborns who seemed to understand far more than they should. Jacob felt tears on his face. He did not wipe them away. Welcome, he whispered to his daughter. Welcome to the mountain. Welcome to the family. Welcome to a world that is hard and cruel and beautiful and worth fighting for. I promise you this. I will teach you to be strong, to be kind, to choose love over fear, and I will never leave you. Not while I draw breath. Grace, exhausted but radiant, reached out and took his hand. We did it, she said. We built something that lasts. Yes, Jacob agreed, we did. Outside, the sun was rising over the peaks, painting the world in shades of crimson and amber. In the compound below, people were waking, starting their day, living their lives in the safety the mountain provided. And on the ridge above the cabin, 3 simple graves marked with stones. Red Willow and Samuel and Standing Bear rested in peace, their sacrifice honored by the sanctuary that had grown in their memory. The mountain had rules. Jacob had learned them over decades of solitary survival. But he had also learned something else, that the mountain's greatest rule was not about strength or endurance or the ability to kill. It was about choice, the choice to help instead of harm, to build instead of destroy, to open instead of close, to love instead of hate. And on this mountain, in this sanctuary, that choice was made every day by every person who lived there. It was made in the meals shared, in the children taught, in the wounded healed, in the stories told, in the simple act of waking up and deciding that today you would be better than yesterday. Jacob Morrow had come to this mountain to die, to hide from a world that had taken everything from him. But instead, he had found a reason to live. And in living well, in building something that mattered, he had discovered the only kind of immortality that actually existed. Not in monuments or money or power, but in the lives touched, the people saved, the love given freely without expectation of return. That was legacy. That was what it meant to matter. And as Jacob stood on his porch, holding his daughter, his wife beside him, his adopted son working in the garden below, the Ute warriors training refugees in survival skills, the former priest teaching children to read, the doctor tending the sick, all of it humming with purpose and life and hope, he finally understood what Red Willow had tried to tell him so many years ago. That love was not finite, that giving it away did not diminish it, that the more you gave, the more you had, that the only way to heal was to help others heal. That sanctuary was not a place, it was a choice, a commitment, a promise kept every single day against a world that wanted to break it. The mountain had taught him survival, but his family, his found family of broken people and second chances, had taught him how to live, and that made all the difference. The sun climbed higher. The day began, and on a mountain in Colorado, far from cities and laws and the corruptions of easy civilization, people who had been lost were finding their way home. The sanctuary stood, and it would stand for generations. Not because it was strong, though it was. Not because it was defensible, though it was, but because it was built on the one foundation that could never be destroyed by fire or violence or the cruelty of greedy men. It was built on love. And love, Jacob had finally learned, was the most powerful force in the world, not because it conquered, but because it endured, because it chose to keep building even when everything else wanted to tear down, because it said yes when the world said no, because it survived, and in surviving, it won the end.